The first note shouldn't have shattered her. Clara Vaughan had built an empire on ice and indifference, on calculated decisions and zero tolerance for weakness. But when the forgotten piano in the corner of her corporate Christmas gala suddenly sang a melody she'd buried 16 years ago, a song her first love had written in secret, a song that died with him, her champagne glass slipped from fingers that had never trembled in a boardroom. The man playing wasn't supposed to exist. The song wasn't supposed to survive. And the way his hands moved across those keys, finishing phrases she thought were lost forever, meant everything she'd believed about her past was a lie. If you want to see where this story goes, if you want to know how a single song can unravel 16 years of carefully constructed walls, stay until the end. And comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The 73rd floor of Vaughan Industries gleamed like a declaration of war against warmth. Every surface reflected cold December light. Marble floors polished to mirrors, chrome fixtures catching the glow of a Christmas tree so geometrically perfect it might have been designed by architects rather than decorated with love. Clara Vaughan had approved every detail of the corporate holiday gala with the same ruthless efficiency she brought to quarterly earnings reports. The tree's branches held exactly 200 silver ornaments, each placed with mathematical precision. The catering staff had been drilled on timing until they moved like clockwork. Even the background music, piped in through invisible speakers, had been selected for its inability to provoke emotion. Nothing in Clara's world was left to chance. Nothing was allowed to make her feel. She stood now at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering sprawl of the city, a champagne flute held loosely in one hand, her reflection sharp against the darkness beyond the glass. At 34, Clara Vaughan was everything the business magazine said she was: brilliant, beautiful, and utterly untouchable. Her black dress was Valentino, her posture was armor, and her expression suggested she was calculating the depreciation value of the decorations even as guests mingled around her. "You're not mingling." The voice came from behind her, smooth and possessive. Clara didn't turn. "I'm observing. There's a difference, Marcus." Marcus Sterling appeared at her elbow, his reflection joining hers in the glass. Tall, impeccably tailored, with the kind of jaw that looked chiseled for magazine covers. He was everything Clara's father approved of: old money, right connections, zero liability. Their engagement had been announced 3 months ago to unanimous approval from the board and society pages alike. It was, by all measurable standards, a perfect match. "Your father's looking for you," Marcus said, his hand settling possessively on her lower back. "Something about the Singapore deal. He wants your input before the Chens arrive." "Of course he does." Clara took a sip of champagne that tasted like expensive nothing. "Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes." Marcus hesitated, his grip tightening slightly. "Clara, you could at least pretend to enjoy your own party." "I'm enjoying the efficiency of it. Isn't that enough?" "You know what I mean." His voice dropped, taking on the edge it got when he felt his control slipping. "People are starting to talk. The Ice Queen CEO who can't even smile at her own Christmas party. It's not a good look." Clara finally turned to face him, her expression unchanged. "I didn't build this company on good looks, Marcus. I built it on results." "You built it on your father's legacy," Marcus corrected quietly. "Let's not pretend otherwise." The words should have stung. Once they might have, but Clara had heard variations of that truth her entire life. From competitors, from business rivals, from her own father in moments of brutal honesty. She'd learned to wear it like the dress she'd chosen tonight, beautiful, expensive, and utterly impenetrable. "Then I suppose I should go preserve that legacy," she said, setting down her champagne. 5 minutes, you said?" But before Marcus could respond, a sound cut through the carefully curated atmosphere of the party. A single piano note, slightly flat, coming from the far corner of the reception hall. Clara's head snapped around. There was an old Steinway in that corner, a relic from when this floor had been the executive lounge in her grandfather's era. It had been draped with a white cloth and relegated to the status of furniture, a surface for guests to set their drinks. No one had played it in years. The thing was probably hideously out of tune. A second note followed the first, then a third. Someone was actually playing the forgotten piano. "Who the hell?" Marcus started, but Clara was already moving, cutting through clusters of executives and their overdressed spouses with the focused intensity she usually reserved for hostile takeovers. The crowd parted instinctively before her, and Clara saw him. He was nobody. That was her first thought, sharp and dismissive. Just one of the maintenance staff, she could tell from the navy blue uniform shirt, slightly rumpled, name tag catching the light. He sat at the piano bench with his back to the party, shoulders hunched in a way that suggested he was trying to make himself invisible. Next to him, perched on the bench with wide eyes and a candy cane clutched in one small hand, was a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. "Daddy, play the Christmas song," the child whispered, her voice carrying in the sudden pocket of quiet that had formed around the piano. "Sweetheart, I don't think—" "Please? You promised." The man's hands hovered over the keys, hesitant. Clara could see them trembling slightly, and she felt a flash of irritation. Some maintenance worker using her corporate event as a playground for his daughter, treating a valuable instrument like a toy. She opened her mouth to have security escort them out. Then his fingers touched the keys, and the world stopped. The first phrase was simple, just a gentle descending melody, the kind a parent might play to lull a child to sleep. But there was something in the way the notes fell, something in the spaces between them, that made every conversation in the room falter. The melody was beautiful, yes, but it was also heartbreaking in a way Clara couldn't immediately name. She found herself frozen 3 feet from the piano, champagne forgotten, Marcus's hand falling away from her arm. The little girl leaned against her father's shoulder, eyes drifting closed, completely trusting. And the man kept playing, his hands moving with increasing confidence across keys that should have been too damaged to sound this clear. The melody built, each phrase leading naturally to the next, and Clara felt something dangerous stirring in her chest, something she'd spent 16 years ensuring stayed buried. Recognition. No, it wasn't possible. The melody shifted, moving into a bridge section that made Clara's breath catch. She knew this song. She knew every note of it, had memorized it in the stolen hours of a relationship she'd thought was love, back when she was 18 and stupid enough to believe in fairy tales. Daniel had written this for her. Daniel Chen, the brilliant composition student she'd met during her 1 semester of freedom before her father had dragged her back into the family business. Daniel, who died in a car accident 3 weeks before graduation, taking with him the only version of this song that had ever existed. He'd never recorded it, never finished it, never even given it a proper name. It had existed only in the moments when he'd played it for her, sitting at the battered upright in the campus music building, his hands moving across keys the same way this stranger's hands were moving now. Exactly the same way. Clara's vision blurred. The room felt too hot, too bright, too full of people who suddenly seemed very far away. The song continued, phrase after impossible phrase, and she realized with growing horror that the stranger wasn't just playing Daniel's unfinished composition. He was completing it. The melody moved into sections she'd never heard before, developments that felt inevitable and perfect, like they'd always been waiting to be played. The little girl had fallen asleep against her father's shoulder, candy cane slipping from her fingers. But the man kept playing, lost in the music, his eyes closed now, his whole body swaying slightly with the melody. There was something in his face, some deep well of grief and longing that made Clara's carefully constructed walls crack. This wasn't just a song to him. It meant something. It cost something. The final phrase hung in the air like a question. Then the man's hands lifted from the keys, and the silence that followed was absolute. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then the applause started. Hesitant at first, then building as the spell broke and the party remembered how to react to beauty. But Clara didn't applaud. She couldn't. She was staring at the man's back, at the name tag she could now read clearly. Evan Brooks, maintenance. He turned slightly, carefully shifting his sleeping daughter in his arms, and Clara finally saw his face. He was maybe 35, with dark hair that needed cutting and the kind of tired eyes that spoke of too many double shifts and not enough sleep. There was a scar on his left hand. She could see it now, running from his wrist to his knuckles, the kind of mark that came from serious injury. His face was unremarkable, the kind you'd pass in a hallway without noticing, except for his eyes. When they met Clara's across the piano, there was something in them that made her forget how to breathe. That was quite something. Marcus's voice cut through the moment like a knife. He'd appeared at Clara's side, his hand reclaiming its position on her back, his tone carrying just enough condescension to remind everyone of the social hierarchy at play. Though I have to question whether the maintenance staff should be using valuable company property for personal entertainment. The man, Evan, went very still. The little girl stirred against his shoulder but didn't wake. I apologize, Evan said quietly, his voice rough, like he didn't use it often. She asked me to play something. I didn't think. Clearly not. Marcus's smile was sharp. But then, thinking isn't really in your job description, is it? Several nearby guests laughed, the kind of polite, uncomfortable laughter that people offer when someone with power makes a joke at someone else's expense. Clara felt something ugly twist in her stomach, but she couldn't seem to make herself move, couldn't make herself speak. She was still trapped in the echo of that song, in the impossible reality of its existence. Evan's jaw tightened. He stood carefully, cradling his daughter, his movements precise and controlled. You're right. I apologize for the disruption, Mr. Sterling. It won't happen again. See that it doesn't. Marcus turned to Clara, his hand sliding to her waist. Darling, your father's still waiting. We should... Where did you learn that song? The words came out before Clara could stop them, sharp and demanding. Every head in the immediate vicinity turned toward her. Marcus's hand tightened warningly on her waist, but Clara ignored him, taking a step toward Evan. The song you just played. Where did you learn it? Evan's expression shuddered completely. I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to me. Clara's voice had taken on the edge she used in boardrooms, the tone that made executives twice her age scramble to comply. That melody, that specific composition. Where did you learn it? Clara. Marcus's voice carried a warning. This is hardly the time. I wrote it, Evan said quietly. His eyes met Clara's again, and this time there was something defiant in them, something that refused to back down despite the obvious power imbalance. I wrote it a long time ago, for someone who didn't know I existed. The air went out of Clara's lungs. That's impossible, she whispered. Daniel wrote that song. Daniel Chen, he finished it, maybe. Evan's voice was steady now, despite the way his daughter had started to stir against his shoulder. But he didn't write it. I did. He took credit for it, and I let him, because I was nobody, and he was somebody, and that's how the world works. That's absurd, Marcus cut in, his voice hard. Clara's fiancé died 16 years ago. He was a brilliant composer. And you expect us to believe that some maintenance worker... I wasn't always maintenance, Evan said. And there was something broken in his voice now, something that made Clara's chest ache. But yeah, you're right. I'm nobody. I shouldn't have played it. I definitely shouldn't have said anything. My apologies, Ms. Vaughn. He turned to leave, but Clara's hand shot out, catching his arm. The contact was electric, sending a jolt through her that had nothing to do with static, and everything to do with the way his eyes widened, the way his breath caught. Wait, she said. I need to know. Clara, let him go. Marcus's voice had turned cold. You're making a scene. She was. Clara could feel the eyes on her, could sense the whispered conversations starting around the edges of the crowd. The Ice Queen CEO publicly confronting maintenance staff. The headlines practically wrote themselves. But she couldn't let go. Not yet. Not when the song that had haunted her for 16 years was suddenly real again, suddenly here in the form of this impossible stranger. Ms. Vaughn, Evan's voice was gentle now, almost pitying. Please, my daughter's asleep. I need to get her home. And you need to get back to your party, your world. This was a mistake. He pulled free from her grip with surprising gentleness, adjusted his daughter in his arms, and walked away. Clara watched him go, watched him navigate through the crowd that parted for him with the same instinctive deference they'd shown her, but for entirely different reasons. They moved for her because she was powerful. They moved for him because he was invisible. Well, Marcus said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. That was certainly dramatic. Clara turned to find him watching her with eyes that had gone cold and calculating. Around them, the party was trying to resume its previous rhythm, but there was a new current of gossip running beneath the surface. She could feel it, could see it in the sidelong glances and quickly averted eyes. "I need to know where he learned that song," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Why?" Marcus's hand on her waist had become almost painful. "What does it matter? Some maintenance worker claiming he wrote your dead boyfriend's composition? It's absurd, Clara. More than that, it's pathetic. He's obviously lying to get attention or money, or he wasn't lying." The words came out flat, certain. Clara didn't know how she knew, but she did. There had been something in Evan's eyes, something in the way he'd played those notes. Grief. Loss. The kind of pain you couldn't fake. "You can't be serious," Marcus stepped in front of her, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Clara, think about what you're saying. Think about what this looks like. You're going to throw away your reputation, your credibility, because some janitor played a song? He's not a janitor. He's maintenance, and he's nobody." Marcus's voice rose sharply, then immediately dropped as he remembered where they were. When he spoke again, his words were carefully controlled, each one precisely placed. "He's nobody, Clara. And you're Clara Vaughn. You don't chase after maintenance workers at your own corporate events. You don't make scenes. And you certainly don't publicly question whether your dead fiancé might have plagiarized his work. Daniel wasn't my fiancé. We dated for 3 months 16 years ago. Long enough for him to write you a song. Long enough for you to spend the next decade and a half comparing every man to a ghost." Marcus's eyes were hard now. "I've been patient with that, Clara. I've understood. But this is too far." Clara opened her mouth to respond, but her father's voice cut across the tension. "Clara, a word." Richard Vaughn materialized beside them, his expression carved from granite. At 67, he was still formidable, tall, silver-haired, with eyes that could reduce board members to stammering apologies. He'd built Vaughn Industries from his father's mid-sized manufacturing company into a global industrial empire. And he'd done it, Clara knew, by never allowing emotion to cloud his judgment. "Father, not here." Richard's hand closed on her elbow, his grip firm. "Marcus, entertain the Chens. Clara and I need to discuss something in private." It wasn't a request. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he nodded, releasing Clara's waist with obvious reluctance. "Of course, sir. Clara will continue this conversation later." Richard guided Clara through the party with the same efficient determination he brought to everything, navigating around clusters of guests with barely a pause for polite acknowledgments. They ended up in Clara's private office, a glass-walled space at the far end of the floor, overlooking the city. The moment the door closed behind them, Richard released her arm and turned to face her with an expression that could freeze steel. "What the hell was that?" Clara had been expecting anger. She wasn't prepared for the ice in his voice, the barely controlled fury that suggested she'd crossed a line she hadn't even known existed. "A maintenance worker played a piano at my party," she said carefully. "I asked him where he learned the song, that's all." "That's all?" Richard's laugh was sharp. "That's all," she says. "Clara, do you have any idea what you just did? In front of 3 board members, 2 major investors, and half the city's business press?" "I asked a question." "You made a spectacle." Richard's voice rose, then immediately dropped again. He never shouted. That would be undignified. But his words could cut deeper than any raised voice. "You publicly challenged the legacy of Daniel Chen, son of our most important business partner in Asia. You suggested that some nobody with a piano might have written the work we've credited to Daniel for the past 16 years. Do you understand the implications of that?" Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. "The Chens are in this building right now, yes. Attending your party, preparing to sign a deal worth $200 million. A deal that depends on good faith, on trust, on the relationship between our families." Richard moved to the window, his silhouette sharp against the city lights. "A relationship that you just jeopardized because you heard a song and decided to chase after the janitor who played it. He said he wrote it, Father. Daniel's song, the one we all thought. I don't care if he said he wrote the complete works of Shakespeare." Richard turned, and Clara saw something in his eyes she'd rarely seen before. Genuine fear. "Clara, listen to me. The Chens lost their son 16 years ago. Losing Daniel nearly destroyed that family. The only thing that gave them comfort was his music, his legacy as a brilliant composer. We've honored that legacy. We've supported musical scholarships in his name. We've built an entire foundation around his work. But if he didn't actually write, it doesn't matter. The words came out sharp, final. Clara, you're a brilliant businesswoman. Act like one. Think about what you're suggesting. If it became public knowledge that Daniel Chen's most famous composition was actually written by some maintenance worker, some nobody who was too weak or too stupid to claim credit for his own work, what would that do? To the Chen family? To our relationship with them? To the foundation, the scholarships, everything we've built? Clara felt the walls closing in. You want me to pretend I didn't hear that song? Pretend I don't know? I want you to remember who you are. Richard crossed the room, his hand settling on her shoulders. His grip was firm, paternal, and utterly unyielding. You're Clara Vaughn. You're about to marry Marcus Sterling, uniting two of the most powerful families in this city. You're on track to take over this company when I retire. You have everything, Clara. Everything. Don't throw it away because some music triggered a memory of a college romance that ended 16 years ago. The words hit like physical blows. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist that this was about truth, about justice, about finally understanding what had happened all those years ago. But she could feel the weight of her father's expectations, the pressure of the empire he'd built and wanted her to inherit. What do you want me to do? She asked quietly. Forget about it. Richard's hands dropped from her shoulders. Go back to your party. Smile at the Chens. Sign the Singapore deal. Marry Marcus in the spring. Live the life you were born to live. And the song? The man who played it? Is irrelevant. Richard moved toward the door, then paused. Clara, I've given you everything. The best education, the best opportunities, a position in this company that you've more than earned. But there are prices to pay for the life we lead. Sometimes those prices involve letting go of things that don't serve our interest. Surely you've learned that by now. He left without waiting for an answer. Clara stood alone in her office, surrounded by glass and steel and the glittering evidence of her success, and felt more trapped than she'd ever felt in her life. The party continued without her. Through the glass walls, she could see the crowd swirling, champagne flowing, deals being made, and alliances being forged. Marcus was visible near the windows, charming the Chens with the practiced ease that made him so valuable. Her father had rejoined the group, his hand on Mr. Chen's shoulder, every inch the gracious host. Clara's reflection stared back at her from the window, elegant, composed, perfectly controlled. The Ice Queen, they called her. The woman who never cracked, never broke, never let emotion dictate her decisions. But her hands were shaking. She pulled out her phone, pulled up the company directory, and typed in a name, Evan Brooks. The entry was minimal. Employee ID number. Department, Facilities Maintenance. Start date, 7 years ago. Emergency contact, Sophie Brooks, daughter, age 5. No spouse listed. Address in a neighborhood Clara knew only by reputation, the kind of area where rent was cheap and dreams went to die. 7 years in maintenance. Before that, nothing. Like he'd appeared fully formed, already broken. Clara's finger hovered over the screen. She could call security, have them pull his file, find out everything about him. She had that power. She could unravel his entire life with a few keystrokes, or she could do what her father said. Forget. Move on. Preserve the carefully constructed fiction that allowed everyone to sleep at night. The song played in her memory, note for impossible note. Daniel's song. Except it wasn't Daniel's, was it? It was Evan's. Had always been Evan's. And somehow she'd loved a lie for 16 years. Clara closed her phone and walked back to the party. She smiled at the Chens. She accepted Marcus's arm around her waist. She toasted to successful partnerships and profitable futures. She played her role perfectly, the way she'd been trained to do since childhood. But later, when the last guest had left and the catering staff was packing up, and Marcus was checking his phone near the elevator, Clara found herself standing by the piano again. Someone had already covered it with the white cloth, transforming it back into furniture, into something decorative and purposeless. She reached out and lifted one corner of the cloth. The keys were old, yellowed, some of them chipped. This piano had lived a life before being relegated to this corner. It had been played by hands that loved it, that knew its voice, that understood how to coax beauty from aging wood and tarnished strings. Clara pressed one key, very gently. The note sang out, slightly flat but still clear, still beautiful. "Ready to go?" Marcus's voice made her jump. She dropped the cloth, turned to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The piano needs tuning," she said, because she had to say something. "The piano needs to be removed." Marcus moved closer, his hands sliding into his pockets. "Clara, we need to talk about tonight, about what happened." "Nothing happened." "Exactly." His eyes were steady on hers. "Nothing happened because you're too smart to let it. But I need to know that you understand what's at stake here, what you're risking." "I'm not risking anything." "Aren't you?" Marcus's hand came up, cupping her cheek with surprising gentleness. "Clara, I love you. I want to marry you. I want us to build something together, something bigger than what either of us could build alone. But I need to know that you're with me, completely. Not chasing ghosts, not questioning the past. Here, present, with me." Clara looked into his eyes, handsome, earnest, offering her everything she was supposed to want, and felt absolutely nothing. "I'm tired," she said. "Can we talk about this tomorrow?" Something flickered across Marcus's face. Disappointment, maybe, or suspicion. But he nodded, dropped his hand, stepped back. "Tomorrow, then. I'll call you." He kissed her cheek, a chaste brush of lips that felt more like a business transaction than affection, and left. Clara listened to his footsteps recede, listened to the elevator doors close, listened to the building settle into silence around her. Then she pulled out her phone again and looked at Evan Brooks's address. She shouldn't go there. She knew she shouldn't. There were 100 reasons not to, professional, personal, practical. Her father was right. Marcus was right. This was madness. But the song wouldn't stop playing in her head. And the look in Evan's eyes when he'd said, "I wrote it for someone who didn't know I existed," wouldn't stop haunting her. Clara grabbed her coat and walked to the elevator. She told herself she was just going to drive by, just going to see what kind of place a man like Evan Brooks called home. She told herself she wouldn't stop, wouldn't knock, wouldn't demand answers to questions she had no right to ask. She told herself a lot of things during the 30-minute drive across the city, from glass towers to crumbling apartment buildings, from the world she knew to a world she'd never had to acknowledge. But when she pulled up outside the address listed in Evan's file, a 4-story walk-up with peeling paint and broken porch lights, Clara knew she was lying to herself. She was going to knock on that door. She was going to demand answers, and nothing, not her father's warnings, not Marcus's expectations, not the empire waiting for her to step into its throne, was going to stop her. Clara got out of the car and walked toward the building, her heels clicking on cracked pavement, her breath misting in the cold December air. Somewhere above her, a window glowed with warm light. Somewhere in this building, Evan Brooks was probably reading his daughter a bedtime story, completely unaware that the woman whose life he'd just destroyed was about to knock on his door. The song played on in Clara's memory, beautiful and impossible and demanding to be understood. And for the first time in 16 years, Clara Vaughn stopped calculating the cost of truth and decided she was willing to pay it, whatever the price. The building's front door hung slightly crooked on its hinges, the security buzzer long since broken. Clara pushed through into a narrow hallway that smelled of old cooking and cheap cleaning products, scents so foreign to her sterilized world that they felt almost aggressive. The fluorescent light overhead flickered with a rhythm that suggested it had been dying for months, maybe years, and no one had bothered to replace it. She climbed 3 flights of stairs, her Louboutins clicking against linoleum that had probably been installed in the 70s and never updated. Each floor revealed the same weary landscape, doors with peeling paint, numbers hanging crooked, the distant sound of television shows and arguments and lives being lived in spaces too small to contain them. Apartment 3C. The door was different from the others, she noticed. Newer. Someone had replaced it recently, though the frame around it was still the same scarred wood as everything else. There was a small wreath hanging from a nail, handmade, constructed from pipe cleaners and construction paper, with Merry Christmas spelled out in uneven letters decorated with too much glitter. Clara raised her hand to knock, then froze. What was she doing? What possible explanation could she give for showing up at a maintenance worker's apartment at 11 o'clock on Christmas Eve? What right did she have to demand answers, to insert herself into this man's life just because a song had triggered memories she'd thought were buried? But her knuckles hit the door anyway, 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through the entire building. Footsteps. Heavy. Hesitant. Then Evan's voice muffled through the door. "Who is it?" "Clara Vaughn." Silence. Long enough that Clara wondered if he was going to pretend he wasn't home, wasn't standing just on the other side of this door, trying to decide if opening it was worth the risk. The door swung inward. Evan had changed out of his uniform into jeans and a faded thermal shirt, his feet bare against cheap laminate flooring. His hair was damp, like he'd just showered, but it was his eyes that stopped Clara. They held the same wariness she'd seen in the faces of companies she was about to acquire, the look of someone who knew they were outmatched and out of options. "Ms. Vaughn," his voice was carefully neutral. "I don't think this is appropriate." "Neither do I." Clara's hands tightened on her purse. "But I need to know about that song. I need to understand how you—" "My daughter's asleep." Evan's hand remained on the door, his body blocking the entrance. "And I think I made myself clear at your party. That was a mistake. I shouldn't have played. I definitely shouldn't have said anything. Can we just leave it at that?" "No?" The word came out sharper than Clara intended. "No, we can't. Because that song, the one you played tonight, was written for me 16 years ago by a man named Daniel Chen. Except apparently he didn't write it. You did, and I need to know how that's possible." Evan's jaw tightened. For a moment, Clara thought he was going to shut the door in her face. Then he stepped back, pulling it open wider. 5 minutes, he said quietly. "Then you leave, and we both forget this conversation happened." The apartment was small, maybe 600 square feet divided into a cramped living room, a kitchenette, and what Clara assumed were 1 or 2 bedrooms beyond a narrow hallway. But it was clean, almost obsessively so, and filled with the kind of carefully managed chaos that spoke of a single parent doing their best. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator. A small Christmas tree sat in the corner, its ornaments clearly homemade. Books were stacked everywhere, on shelves, on the coffee table, beside a worn armchair that faced a television so old it probably still had a VCR. Through an open doorway, Clara could see into a bedroom where a little girl slept in a bed shaped like a princess carriage, a nightlight casting soft shadows across walls painted pale pink. "She's beautiful," Clara said, because she didn't know how else to start. "Yes." Evan's voice carried a warmth it hadn't held before. "She's everything." He moved to the kitchenette, began making coffee without asking if Clara wanted any. His movements were efficient, practiced, the routine of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Clara remained standing in the middle of the living room, suddenly aware of how out of place she was. Her designer dress, her expensive jewelry, her entire existence a jarring contrast to this world of second-hand furniture and carefully counted pennies. "I went to Juilliard," Evan said finally, his back still to her. "Full scholarship, piano performance. I was good. Not great, but good enough that people noticed. Good enough that I thought I might actually make something of myself." Clara sat down slowly in the armchair, her eyes never leaving Evan's back. "Daniel Chen was in my composition class. Brilliant guy, talented family, all the right connections. We weren't friends exactly, but we ran in the same circles. Both piano students, both trying to figure out who we were going to be." Evan poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. He needed help with a project, a song cycle for his final composition portfolio. I was between jobs, needed the money, so I agreed to help him with the piano arrangements. He turned, holding out one of the mugs. Clara took it, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. The contact sent a jolt through her that she immediately tried to ignore. "I started writing in my spare time," Evan continued, settling onto the arm of the couch, his own mug cradled in both hands. "Nothing serious, just melodies that wouldn't leave me alone. There was this girl I'd see sometimes in the library. She was always there late, always studying, always looking like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. I never talked to her, never even knew her name, but I'd watch her sometimes, and I'd think about what kind of music would match her. Something beautiful but sad. Something that understood what it meant to be lonely even when you were surrounded by people. Claire's throat tightened. That was me. I was at Juilliard for one semester before my father pulled me out, put me to work in the company. I spent every free hour in that library trying to pretend I wasn't losing everything I'd wanted. I know that now. Evan's smile was sad. But at the time, you were just this beautiful, untouchable girl who lived in a different world. And I was nobody. So I wrote you a song instead of talking to you. Seemed safer. He took a sip of coffee, his eyes distant with memory. Daniel heard me playing it one day. Asked what it was. I told him it was just something I was working on, nothing important. He asked if he could use it, said he had a project due and was struggling for inspiration. I said, sure, why not? I didn't think it mattered. It was just a melody, just notes on a page. Evan's hands tightened on the mug. Then I found out he'd dedicated it to you, Clara Vaughn, the girl from the library. He'd performed it at some student recital, told everyone he'd written it for the woman he loved. And you were there, and you believed him, and suddenly my song became the foundation of his relationship with you. Clara set down her coffee with shaking hands. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you tell someone he'd stolen your work? Because he was Daniel Chen, and I was Evan Brooks. Because his father could make one phone call and destroy any chance I had at a career in music. Because I was a scholarship kid from nowhere, and he was legacy, connections, future. Evan's voice had gone flat. Because in that world, Ms. Vaughn, nobody cares about who actually wrote the song. They care about who has the power to claim it. That's not true. If you had proof, if you could have shown... I had notebooks full of drafts. I had the original composition, every version of it, every change I'd made. You know what Daniel's father said when I finally worked up the courage to confront them? Evan stood abruptly, moved to the window overlooking the street. He said that if I made trouble, he'd ensure I never worked in music again. Not performing, not teaching, not even selling instruments in some strip mall. He'd destroy me. And then he offered me $20,000 to sign a document saying I'd been Daniel's assistant, that any work I'd done was under his direction and belonged to him. Clara felt sick. You took the money. I needed it. Evan's voice was barely above a whisper. My mother was sick. Cancer. We had no insurance, no savings, no options. $20,000 bought her 6 more months of treatment. 6 months where she wasn't in constant pain, where she could actually enjoy what was left of her life. So yes, Ms. Vaughn, I took the money. I signed the papers. I let Daniel Chen claim credit for my work, and I've lived with that choice every day since. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of sirens outside, the city's constant reminder that suffering never slept. Daniel died 3 weeks before graduation, Clara said quietly. Car accident. He was driving back from visiting his parents when he lost control. The police said he fell asleep at the wheel. I know. I was there. Evan turned from the window, his face carefully blank. Not at the accident, but at the funeral. I stood in the back, watching everyone cry for this brilliant composer who'd been taken too soon. Watching you, actually. You were 18, wearing a black dress that was too big for you, and you looked like your whole world had ended. The Chen started a foundation in his name, scholarships for young composers, all based on work that included my melody, my composition, my grief turned into something I could never claim. And you just let it happen. For 16 years, you let everyone believe a lie. What was I supposed to do? Evan's composure cracked, anger flashing in his eyes for the first time. His family had just lost their son. You'd lost someone you loved. The foundation was helping real students, making real differences in their lives. Was I supposed to destroy all of that because I wanted credit for a song? Because I couldn't let go of my ego? It wasn't about ego, Clara stood, her own anger rising to match his. It was about truth, about ownership, about not letting powerful people steal from those who can't fight back. You really believe that? Evan laughed, a harsh sound without humor. You, Clara Vaughn, standing in my apartment in your dress that probably cost more than I make in 6 months, lecturing me about fighting back against powerful people? Your father built his empire on exactly the kind of decisions I made, taking shortcuts, sacrificing the powerless, crushing anyone who got in his way. The only difference is he never had to sign away his dignity for $20,000. He just took what he wanted and dared anyone to stop him. The words hit like a slap. Clara wanted to deny them, wanted to defend her father, her family, the empire she'd spent her life building. But something in Evan's eyes stopped her. A recognition of something she'd always known but never acknowledged. "You're right," she said quietly. "About all of it. My father, Vaughn Industries, we've made compromises that would horrify most people. But that doesn't change what happened to you, what they did to you. They didn't do anything to me that I didn't allow." Evan moved back to the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. "After my mother died, I tried to rebuild my career. Got a few teaching positions, some session work, enough to get by. Then 7 years ago, I was working as a piano technician for a concert hall. There was an accident, a stage platform malfunction during setup. I was underneath when it collapsed." He held up his left hand, showing Clara the scar she'd noticed earlier. In the apartment's harsh light, she could see it ran even deeper than she'd thought, the flesh twisted and discolored. "Crushed everything from my wrist to my fingertips. 3 surgeries, 2 years of physical therapy, and I got back maybe 70% function. Enough to play simple melodies, enough to teach my daughter basic songs, not enough to perform, not enough to work as a technician, not enough to do anything in music professionally." Clara sat down slowly. "The concert hall. Where did this happen? Does it matter?" "Yes. Yes, it matters. Because if there was negligence, if someone was responsible, it was the Paramount, downtown. Your family owns the building." The room tilted. Clara gripped the arm of the chair, her mind racing through property records, subsidiary companies, the vast network of holdings that made up Vaughn Industries. The Paramount had been acquired 12 years ago as part of a real estate package, then leased out to various entertainment companies. She'd never paid attention to it, had barely known it existed. "There was an investigation," Evan continued, his voice mechanical now, reciting facts like they belonged to someone else. "OSHA found multiple safety violations. Inadequate maintenance, faulty equipment, corner cutting to maximize profits. The building management, your company's subsidiary, was fined. I got a settlement, $60,000 and a medical release saying I wouldn't pursue further legal action." $60,000. Claire's voice was hollow. "For your entire career. For everything you could have been. It was enough to cover my medical bills and put a down payment on a lawyer for my custody case. Sophie's mother didn't want her anymore. Too much responsibility, too expensive, interfered with her new life. But she was willing to fight me for her anyway, just for the principle of it. The $60,000 bought me a lawyer who could actually show up to court sober. I got full custody, and when the money ran out, I took the only job I could get with one barely functional hand and no professional references." "Maintenance," Clara whispered. "Your company again. Different subsidiary, different department, but same family at the top." The irony wasn't lost on me. Evan's smile was bitter. "I've been cleaning your offices for 7 years, Ms. Vaughn. Emptying your trash, fixing your broken equipment, being invisible in the background of your perfect corporate world. And every day I told myself it was fine. I had Sophie. I had a job that paid the bills. I didn't need anything else." He stood abruptly, moved to the window again, his shoulders rigid. "Then tonight, Sophie asked me to play her a Christmas song. She loves music, asks about it constantly, wants to know why I don't play anymore like I used to. And I sat down at that piano in your building. The building I clean every night, the building that represents everything I'll never have. And I started playing the only song that's ever really mattered to me. The song I wrote for a girl in a library who never knew I existed. The song that became someone else's legacy while I mopped floors and tried to forget I'd ever wanted more." Clara walked to stand beside him at the window. Outside, the city glittered with Christmas lights, each window a small declaration against the darkness. Somewhere out there, people were celebrating, believing in magic and second chances and the possibility that tomorrow might be better than today. "I knew," she said quietly. "The moment you started playing, somewhere inside I knew it wasn't Daniel's song. The phrasing was different, the emotional weight of it. Daniel was brilliant, but he was never broken like that. He never understood what it meant to want something so badly it hurt to breathe. But you do. That song, it's full of that pain, that longing. Evan's reflection in the window showed eyes that had gone very bright. You loved him. I loved the idea of him, the romance of it, the talented composer who wrote me a song, who saw me as something more than just Richard Vaughn's disappointing daughter. But I was 18 and I was desperate for someone to choose me for myself rather than for what I represented. When he died, I turned that relationship into something more than it ever was. A perfect love story cut tragically short. Clara's laugh was hollow. I've spent 16 years comparing every man to a memory that was never real to begin with. And everyone let me, because it was easier than admitting the truth. What truth? That Daniel Chen was a thief. That my father knew it and didn't care because the Chen family was too valuable to alienate. That I built an entire romantic mythology around a song that was stolen from someone who actually understood what I was feeling. Clara turned to face him directly. You saw me, Evan. In that library all those years ago. You saw the loneliness, the weight, the feeling of being trapped in a life I never chose. And you wrote me a song about it. Not Daniel. You. Evan's hand came up slowly, his scarred fingers hovering near her face but not quite touching. I was invisible to you. I was invisible to everyone. And maybe that was safer. Because if you'd actually seen me, if you'd actually known me, you would have realized I had nothing to offer. No family connections, no money, no future that could possibly match yours. The song was the best of me, the only thing worth giving you, and I couldn't even keep that. You kept it tonight. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. You played it. You finished it. After 16 years, after everything that's happened, you still remembered every note. I never forgot. His hand dropped. That's the thing about writing something from your soul, Ms. Vaughn. It doesn't matter if someone else claims it. It doesn't matter if the world forgets you made it. It's still yours. It lives in you. And every time I hear it, every time I think about it, I'm back in that practice room at Juilliard watching you through the window, trying to find notes that could somehow express what I didn't have words for. A sound from the bedroom made them both turn. Sophie appeared in the doorway, clutching a stuffed rabbit, her eyes squinting against the light. Daddy? Who's the pretty lady? Evan immediately moved to his daughter, scooping her up with practiced ease despite the limits of his damaged hand. Just someone from work, sweetheart. Go back to sleep. Did she like your song? Sophie's head rested against his shoulder, her words slightly slurred with exhaustion. Everyone always likes your songs. Not everyone, Bug. Not the people who matter. Sophie pulled back to look at her father with the devastating clarity only children possess. I matter, and I like them. So there. Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling. She's right, you know. That's pretty irrefutable logic. Sophie, this is Ms. Vaughn. Ms. Vaughn, my daughter Sophie. The little girl studied Clara with open curiosity. You're really pretty, and you smell nice, like flowers. Thank you. You're very pretty, too, and I like your rabbit. His name is Mr. Floppington. He's very brave. Sophie yawned hugely. Are you Daddy's friend? The question hung in the air, weighted with more complexity than a 5-year-old could possibly understand. Clara looked at Evan, saw the wariness in his eyes, the way he held his daughter like she was the only thing keeping him grounded. I'm trying to be, Clara said finally. If your daddy will let me. Evan carried Sophie back to bed, murmuring quiet reassurances. Clara heard the ritual of tucking in, the adjustment of blankets, the whispered I love yous that spoke of a bond so pure it made her chest ache. When he returned, closing the bedroom door softly behind him, his expression had shifted into something carefully neutral. You should go, he said quietly. It's late, and this, whatever this is, it can't lead anywhere good. Why not? Because you're Clara Vaughn, and I'm the guy who empties your trash cans. Because your father would destroy me, destroy both of us, if he thought for a second that you were considering anything beyond this moment. Because I have a daughter who depends on me, who needs stability and security, and I can't risk my job, my custody, my entire life just because you're feeling guilty about a song. Is that what you think this is? Guilt? Evan moved closer, and Clara could see the exhaustion in every line of his face. What else could it be? You heard a melody that reminded you of your dead boyfriend, found out the story wasn't what you thought, and now you're trying to, what, make amends? Set the record straight? Ease your conscience? I'm trying to understand what I threw away. The words came out raw, unplanned. I'm trying to understand how I spent 16 years mourning the wrong person, building my entire emotional life around a lie while the truth was cleaning my office floors. I'm trying to understand how the universe could be cruel enough to put you in my building, in my world, for 7 years, and I never saw you, never knew you existed. Maybe you weren't supposed to see me. Maybe some people are meant to stay invisible. Stop saying that. Clara closed the distance between them, her hands coming up to grip his arms. Stop acting like you deserve to be erased. You wrote a song that's haunted me for 16 years. You created something beautiful enough to build a foundation on, to inspire scholarships, to touch people's lives. And then you lost everything, your career, your health, your ability to create, because my family's company valued profit over safety. You don't get to be invisible anymore, Evan. Not to me. His hands came up to cover hers, and Clara felt the twisted scar tissue beneath her fingers, the permanent reminder of what he'd sacrificed. What are you asking me, Clara? His voice was raw. What do you want from this conversation? Because if you're here looking for absolution, I can't give you that. Your family's sins aren't yours to carry, and if you're here because you're trying to find some way to fix what happened, to make it right somehow, you can't. It's done. It's been done for 7 years, for 16 years, and no amount of late-night conversations is going to change that. I want the truth. Clara's grip tightened. I want to know what really happened, all of it. The song, the settlement, everything. And then I want to figure out how to make sure it never happens to anyone else. Evan pulled away, creating distance between them. You can't fix this, Clara. You can't wave your Vaughn Industries magic wand and make everything better. The world doesn't work that way, not for people like me. Then tell me how it does work. Help me understand. He laughed, a sound full of broken edges. You really want to understand? Fine. After the accident, when I couldn't play anymore, I had nothing. No career, no prospects, no way to support my daughter. Your company's settlement included a clause, standard in these situations, apparently. In exchange for the money, I agreed not to pursue further legal action and not to speak publicly about the accident or its circumstances. Essentially, I sold my right to tell the truth. And the beautiful irony is that I'd already done that once before, with Daniel and the song. I seem to make a habit of signing away pieces of myself for just enough money to survive. Clara felt something cold and terrible settling in her stomach. The non-disclosure agreement. That's why you never said anything about the safety violations, why the story never became public. Your lawyers were very thorough, very efficient, very good at their jobs. Evan's voice had gone flat again. And I signed because I had a 2-year-old daughter and no other options. Because $60,000 was more money than I'd ever seen, and it meant I could fight for custody without losing everything. Because sometimes survival means swallowing your pride and accepting that justice is a luxury you can't afford. I'll break it. The words came out fierce, certain. The NDA. I'll have our legal department void it, claim it was signed under duress, find some loophole. You'll be free to tell your story, And then what? Evan cut her off, his eyes blazing. I go public with the fact that Vaughn Industries prioritized profits over safety, that their negligence destroyed my career? What do you think happens next, Clara? You think the company just accepts that? You think your father sits back and lets his reputation get dragged through the mud by a former maintenance worker with an axe to grind? He doesn't control me, doesn't he? Evan moved back to the window, his shoulders rigid. You showed up at my apartment at 11 o'clock on Christmas Eve because of a song. Where do you think you'll be tomorrow morning when your father calls demanding to know why you're not at the family breakfast? When Marcus wants to know why you disappeared after the party? When the board starts asking questions about your judgment? You can't save me, Clara. And trying to will only destroy us both. The truth of his words hit like a physical blow. Clara sank back into the armchair, her head in her hands, feeling the weight of her entire life pressing down on her shoulders. He was right. Of course he was right. She could challenge her father, could fight against the machine she was part of, but the cost would be everything she'd built. her position in the company, her relationship with her family, the future she'd been groomed for since birth. But when she looked up, when she saw Evan standing at the window with defeat written in every line of his body, Clara realized something that terrified her more than any of her father's threats. She didn't care. About the company, about her reputation, about the carefully constructed life that suddenly felt like a beautiful prison. She cared about the truth. And she cared about the man who'd written her a song from the shadows and never expected anything in return. What if I don't want to be saved? Clara stood slowly. What if I'm tired of pretending that everything my family built was noble and good? What if I want to burn it all down and start over with something real? Evan turned, his expression caught between hope and fear. You don't know what you're saying. Don't I? I've spent my entire adult life building an empire I never wanted, defending decisions I knew were wrong, becoming exactly what my father trained me to be. And tonight, I heard the song that reminded me who I used to be before all of this. A girl in a library who was desperately lonely and didn't know how to ask for help. A girl who would have given anything for someone to actually see her instead of the Vaughn name. She crossed the room until she stood directly in front of him. You saw me, Evan. 16 years ago, you saw me. And you wrote me something beautiful instead of using me or dismissing me or treating me like a stepping stone to something better. You gave me the best part of yourself and asked for nothing back. And I'm not going to walk away from that just because it's complicated or dangerous or threatens everything I thought I knew. Evan's hand came up, cupping her face with a gentleness that made Clara's breath catch. His scarred fingers traced her cheekbone, and she could feel them trembling. Clara, he whispered, her name a prayer and a warning. If you do this, if you actually try to fight back against your family, against the system that protects them, there's no going back. They'll destroy you. They'll take everything. Then I'll rebuild with nothing, like you did. I didn't rebuild. I survived. There's a difference. Clara's hands came up to cover his, holding them against her face. Then teach me how. Teach me what it means to choose truth over comfort. Show me how to be brave enough to let go of everything I never really wanted anyway. For a long moment, they stood there in the dim light of his living room, the city breathing around them, Sophie sleeping peacefully in the next room. And Clara felt something shift inside her, some fundamental transformation that had nothing to do with the song and everything to do with the recognition passing between them. This wasn't about romance. It wasn't about fixing the past or seeking redemption. It was about two people who'd been invisible to the world in different ways, finally seeing each other clearly. I need to go, Clara said finally, though she didn't move. But I'm coming back. Tomorrow? Or the next day? Or whenever you're ready to talk more. Because this conversation isn't over, Evan. Not by a long shot. Your father can wait. Clara stepped back, letting her hands fall. For the first time in my life, Richard Vaughn and his expectations can wait. She walked to the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. The song. The one you played tonight. It deserves to be finished properly. Recorded. Shared. Not as Daniel's legacy or anyone else's. As yours. Evan's expression was unreadable. That ship sailed a long time ago. Maybe. Or maybe it's just been waiting for the right moment. For someone who actually cared about the truth to hear it and refused to let it be buried. Clara opened the door. Merry Christmas, Evan. Thank you for the music. She left before he could respond, walking back down the 3 flights of stairs and out into the December cold. Her car sat waiting where she'd left it, a sleek black statement that looked absurdly out of place in this neighborhood of rust and pragmatism. Clara got in and sat there for a long moment, her hands on the steering wheel, her breath misting in the air. Above her, a light was still on in apartment 3C. She imagined Evan standing at the window, watching her leave, trying to decide if she was genuine or just another person who would ultimately choose comfort over courage. She'd have to prove him wrong. Starting tomorrow. Starting now. Clara pulled out her phone and opened her email. 3 new messages from Marcus, each one progressively more concerned about her disappearance. 2 from her father, both marked urgent, and 1 from her assistant, confirming the schedule for tomorrow's family Christmas breakfast, complete with the Chens and their expectation that the Singapore deal would be finalized. She deleted them all. Then Clara composed a new message to her personal attorney, someone who owed loyalty to her rather than to Vaughn Industries. The subject line was simple: need to review an NDA, urgent, confidential. She didn't send it, not yet, because she needed to think this through, needed to understand all the ways this could explode in her face. But having the email drafted, having taken even that small step toward action, made her feel more alive than she'd felt in years. The light in apartment 3C went dark. Clara started her car and pulled away from the curb, heading back toward the glittering towers and the life she'd built from expectation and obligation. But something had fundamentally changed during the drive across the city. She was different now, not transformed completely, not suddenly brave or certain of her path, just finally, impossibly awake. And the song played on in her memory, each note a reminder that some truths refused to stay buried, no matter how many years passed or how many powerful people wanted them forgotten. The Christmas morning sun hit Clara's penthouse windows with aggressive cheerfulness, turning the floor-to-ceiling glass into mirrors that reflected a woman who hadn't slept. She stood in yesterday's dress, her makeup smeared, her carefully constructed armor in complete disarray. Her phone had been ringing for the past 2 hours. Her father, Marcus, her assistant, each call more insistent than the last. She'd ignored them all. Instead, she'd spent the night researching. Not the kind of surface-level investigation she usually delegated to subordinates, but deep methodical digging through public records, court documents, OSHA reports. The Paramount Theater accident wasn't hard to find once she knew what to look for. The official investigation had been thorough, damning even. Multiple safety violations, deferred maintenance, a corporate culture that prioritized profit margins over worker protection. The building management company, a Vaughn Industries subsidiary, had paid fines totaling $200,000. Pocket change compared to their annual revenue. Evan Brooks' name appeared in the settlement records, listed alongside 3 other injured workers. But his payout had been significantly larger than the others, and Clara understood why when she found the medical reports attached to the case file. Crushed metacarpals, severed tendons, nerve damage classified as permanent and degenerative. The doctor's notes were clinical but devastating. Patient will retain approximately 60 to 70% function. Professional-level piano performance no longer viable. They'd destroyed his hands, and then they'd paid him just enough to ensure his silence. Clara's personal line rang again. This time, she answered. "Where the hell are you?" Marcus's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "Your father has called me 4 times. The Chens are waiting. Do you have any idea how this looks?" "I'm not coming to breakfast." Silence. Then, "Excuse me?" "I said I'm not coming. Tell my father I'm sick. Tell him whatever you want. But I'm not sitting through another performance where we all pretend the Chen family built their wealth on anything other than tragedy and stolen credit." "Clara," Marcus's tone shifted, becoming the careful, measured voice he used when negotiating hostile deals. "I don't know what happened last night after the party, but you need to think very carefully about what you're doing. The Singapore contract can wait, or not. I don't particularly care anymore." "You don't care," Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Clara Vaughn doesn't care about a $200 million deal. Clara Vaughn doesn't care about her family's business interests. What exactly happened between leaving the party and now that's made you lose your mind? "I heard a song, Marcus, and it woke me up." She hung up before he could respond, then immediately silenced her phone. The notifications kept coming, texts, emails, voicemails piling up like accusations. But Clara ignored them all. She had work to do, and for the first time in her life, it was work that actually mattered. Her personal attorney called back within an hour of receiving Clara's email. Jennifer Matthews had been Clara's legal counsel for 5 years, handling everything from contract reviews to the prenuptial agreement Marcus had insisted on. She was sharp, discreet, and expensive enough that her loyalty was assured. "The NDA you sent me," Jennifer said without preamble. "Where did you get it?" "From company files, 7 years old, signed by a former employee as part of an accident settlement." "Clara, this is a Vaughn Industries document. If you're asking me to challenge it, I need to know why. And I need to know if you've cleared this with your father or the board." "I haven't, and I won't. This is personal, Jennifer. Can you break it or not?" Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. "Technically, yes. There are several clauses that could be challenged as overly broad or potentially coercive. The settlement was signed without independent legal counsel present, which is questionable, and the amount, $60,000 for injuries this severe, could be argued as inadequate consideration for such extensive restrictions on speech. So we can void it. We can try, but Clara, you need to understand what you're asking for. Challenging this NDA means opening up the entire Paramount Theater case. It means publicity, potential litigation, exposure of company practices that were, let's say, less than ideal. Your father will fight you on this. The board will fight you. And if you lose, you won't just lose the legal battle. You'll lose everything else, too. Clara walked to the window, looking out at the city that had always seemed so firmly under her control. What if I'm willing to lose? Then you're either very brave or very foolish, possibly both. Jennifer's tone softened slightly. Clara, in the 5 years I've known you, I've watched you build an empire. You're brilliant, you're ruthless when necessary, and you've earned every bit of respect you command. But this, whatever this is, it will change everything. Are you absolutely certain it's worth it? No, Clara said honestly, but I'm certain that continuing to pretend it never happened isn't an option anymore. Find me the weakest points in that NDA and start drafting a letter of intent to challenge. You're going to need more than just legal strategy. You're going to need evidence, witnesses, a narrative that makes sense to people who don't know the backstory. This man, Evan Brooks, is he willing to fight? Because if he's not, if he decides his silence is worth more than vindication, this whole thing falls apart. Clara thought about Evan standing in his small apartment, his daughter asleep in the next room, his entire life balanced on the razor's edge of survival. I don't know, but I'm going to find out. She drove back to Evan's neighborhood in full daylight this time, the December sun exposing every crack in the pavement, every boarded window, every visible marker of the economic divide she'd spent her life ignoring. Children played in a small park despite the cold, their laughter cutting through the industrial sounds of the city. An elderly woman swept her front steps with meticulous care, her movements speaking of pride that refused to bow to circumstance. This was Evan's world, not temporary, not tragic, just real in a way Clara's gleaming towers could never be. She parked in the same spot as last night and climbed the same 3 flights of stairs. But this time, when she knocked on apartment 3C, there was no hesitation in her movements. She'd made her choice during the sleepless hours between midnight and dawn. Now she just needed Evan to make his. The door opened to reveal not Evan, but Sophie, still in princess pajamas, her hair an adorable disaster. "You came back!" The little girl's face lit up with uncomplicated joy. "Daddy said you probably wouldn't, but I knew you would because you're nice and you smell like flowers." "Sophie, what did I tell you about opening the door?" Evan appeared behind his daughter, pulling her back gently. His eyes met Clara's with an expression caught between resignation and something that might have been hope. "I'm sorry, she's too friendly for her own good." "It's fine. I like friendly." Clara crouched down to Sophie's level. "Good morning, Mr. Floppington. Did you sleep well?" Sophie held up the stuffed rabbit with solemn importance. "He had bad dreams about dragons, but I told him dragons aren't real, and also that Daddy would protect us." "Daddy can fight anything." "I bet he can." Clara stood slowly, her eyes never leaving Evan's face. "Can we talk?" Evan glanced at his daughter, then nodded. "Sophie, go watch cartoons for a bit, okay? And stay away from the cookies. I know you know where I hid them." "I would never!" Sophie's expression of innocence was completely undermined by the chocolate smudge on her collar. She scampered off to the living room, and Clara heard the television click on. Evan stepped into the hallway, pulling the door partially closed behind him. In the harsh fluorescent light, Claire could see the exhaustion in his face, the evidence that he'd slept as poorly as she had. "You shouldn't have come back," he said quietly. "We talked. You got your answers. It's done. There's no reason to I want to challenge the NDA." The words came out flat, certain. "I have a lawyer reviewing it right now. We think we can break it, for you to tell your story about what happened at the Paramount, about the safety violations, the negligence, all of it." Evan went very still. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's the truth. Because my family's company destroyed your career and then paid you to stay quiet about it. Because I'm tired of being complicit in a system that protects the powerful at the expense of everyone else. You don't owe me anything, Clara. You weren't even running the company 7 years ago. No, but I'm running it now. Or I'm supposed to be. And that means the choices made under the Vaughn name are my responsibility. Clara moved closer, her voice dropping. I spent last night reading the OSHA reports, the settlement documents, everything. Do you know how many safety violations they found? 17. 17 separate instances where my family's company chose profit over people. And you weren't the only one hurt. There were 3 other workers who settled for even less than you got. Evan's jaw tightened. I know. I was there. I watched them take their checks and sign their papers and walk away knowing they'd never work in their fields again. Tommy was a stagehand, 30 years of experience. The platform crushed his leg. He got $40,000 and a limp that never healed. Maria was a lighting technician. Concussion so severe she still gets headaches that put her out of commission for days. She got $25,000 and a medical release. We all sold our silence because we all needed to survive. And my family counted on that. They built an entire strategy around the fact that desperate people will accept whatever they're offered. Clara felt anger rising in her chest, hot and unfamiliar. But what if you didn't have to anymore? What if you could tell the truth without losing everything? There's always a cost, Clara. Always. You break that NDA, your father will come after me with everything he has. He'll destroy my custody arrangement, get me fired, blacklist me from ever working again. He'll make sure I lose Sophie. Not if I protect you. Not if I use every resource I have to make sure. You can't promise that. Evan's voice rose, then immediately dropped as he remembered his daughter in the next room. You're one person, Clara. One person with good intentions and a guilty conscience. But your father is Richard Vaughn. He's built an empire on crushing people who get in his way, and he won't hesitate to crush me too, especially if it means teaching you a lesson about loyalty. Clara reached out, her hand closing on his arm. Then we fight him together. You, me, Jennifer, my lawyer. We build a case so airtight he can't touch you without exposing himself. You really believe that's possible? You think your father won't find a way to twist this, to make me look like the villain? Disgruntled employee seeking attention, maintenance worker with delusions of grandeur, failed pianist trying to blame his problems on someone else. Evan pulled away from her grip. That's how this plays out, Clara, not with justice and vindication. With me losing my daughter and you losing your family. Is that really what you want? I want the truth to matter more than convenience. The truth doesn't pay rent. The truth doesn't keep food on the table or ensure custody rights. The truth is a luxury, Clara, and I can't afford it. They stood in the dim hallway, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on both of them. From inside the apartment, Clara could hear cartoon voices and Sophie's delighted laughter. That sound, so pure, so uncomplicated, made everything else feel absurdly heavy. What if there was another way? Clara said finally. Not legal action, not public exposure. What if we could get your story out there without violating the NDA? Tell it through other means, build awareness without directly challenging the settlement. You mean manipulate the system the same way it manipulated me? I mean, use every tool available to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else. Document the pattern, highlight the corporate culture, force change from the inside. Clara leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. I don't have all the answers, Evan, but I know I can't go back to pretending I don't know what I know now. And I know you deserve better than spending the rest of your life invisible. The apartment door opened wider, and Sophie peeked out. Are you fighting? Because fighting is not nice, and also Mr. Floppington says you should have cookies and talk about it. Despite everything, Evan smiled. Mr. Floppington is very wise. Come on, both of you. If we're going to discuss destroying my life, we might as well do it with chocolate chips. The apartment seemed smaller in daylight, the careful management of limited space more obvious. But it was also warmer than Clara's penthouse had ever been, filled with the evidence of lives being lived rather than curated. Sophie's artwork covered every available surface. Books spilled from shelves in a way that suggested they were read rather than displayed. The kitchen smelled like coffee and cinnamon, and there was a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table that looked genuinely challenging. Sophie distributed cookies with the seriousness of a diplomat negotiating peace treaties. 3 each. That's fair. Also, you have to sit on the floor because all the good sitting spots are taken. Clara found herself on the floor next to the puzzle, a chocolate chip cookie in hand, watching Evan settle cross-legged across from her while Sophie climbed into his lap with the ease of long practice. So, Evan said, breaking his cookie in half and offering part to his daughter. You want to take down Vaughn Industries from the inside. That's ambitious. Not take down. Reform. Make it into something that actually values people over profit margins. Your father will never allow that. The board will never allow that. You'd be fighting an entire system designed to resist exactly the kind of change you're talking about. Maybe. Or maybe the system only seems invincible because no one's challenged it properly. Clara took a bite of her cookie, surprised to find it was homemade and delicious. My father built Vaughn Industries on a foundation of calculated risk and ruthless efficiency. But he's also 67 years old and starting to think about legacy. What if I could convince him that true legacy means more than just quarterly earnings? Evan laughed, but there was sadness in it. You're talking about changing a man who's spent his entire life believing that power justifies any means necessary. That's not going to happen because his daughter suddenly developed a conscience. It might if his daughter suddenly became a liability he couldn't afford. Clara set down her cookie, her mind already working through strategies. My father values control above everything else, but control requires predictability. What if I became unpredictable? What if I started making decisions that forced him to choose between protecting the company's reputation and maintaining his grip on power? That's dangerous, Clara. You're talking about going to war with your own family. I'm talking about using the skills he taught me against the system he created. He made me into exactly what Vaughn Industries needed. Someone smart enough to see all the angles, ruthless enough to exploit them, and ambitious enough to always want more. But he forgot to account for the possibility that I might want more than he was willing to give me. Sophie had been listening with the selective attention children bring to adult conversations, clearly understanding more than they pretended. Are you going to be friends with Daddy or not? Because I think you should. He needs friends who aren't just me and Mr. Floppington. Evan's expression softened. Bug, this is complicated adult stuff. I'm 5 3/4. That's almost 6. I understand complicated. Sophie turned to Clara with devastating directness. Daddy's sad a lot. He tries to hide it, but I know. And when you came last night and he played the pretty song, he looked less sad. So I think you should stay and make him keep looking less sad. The simple truth of it hung in the air. Clara felt something crack in her chest, some carefully maintained wall crumbling under the weight of a 5-year-old's observation. I'd like that, Clara said quietly. If your daddy will let me. Evan's hands had tightened around his daughter, his eyes very bright. Sophie, why don't you go work on your coloring book for a bit, the princess one you got for Christmas? But I want to hear the grown-up talk. Nice try. Go color. And if you're very good, maybe we'll go to the park later. Sophie sighed with the world weariness only children can muster, then kissed her father's cheek and wandered off to her bedroom. The moment her door closed, Evan's composure cracked. She's right, he said, his voice rough. I am sad a lot. I've been sad for 7 years, for 16 years. For so long I can barely remember what it felt like to not carry that weight around. And last night, when I played that song and saw you standing there, when I told you the truth for the first time in my life, I felt something I haven't felt since before the accident. I felt seen. Clara moved closer, closing the distance between them until their knees almost touched. Then let me keep seeing you. Let me help you fight back, even if it's dangerous, even if we don't know how it ends. Because I'm tired of being invisible too, Evan. I'm tired of being Clara Vaughn, perfect corporate princess, when I stopped knowing who Clara actually is years ago. What are you asking for? Really? I don't know yet, but I know it starts with the truth. Your truth about the song, about the accident, about everything that's been taken from you. And I know it means I'm going to have to choose between the life I've built and the person I want to become. Evan reached out slowly, his scarred hand hovering near her face the same way it had last night. If you do this, if you actually challenge your family, if you actually try to change things, there's no going back. You'll lose everything you've worked for, and I can't promise you'll get anything in return except the satisfaction of having tried. Maybe that's enough. Clara leaned into his touch, feeling the roughness of damaged skin against her cheek. Maybe trying is the only thing that actually matters. They sat like that for a long moment, the city breathing around them, Sophie humming in the other room, the weight of impossible choices pressing down but somehow feeling lighter when shared. Clara's phone buzzed insistently in her purse. She ignored it, but the interruption broke the spell. Evan pulled back, his expression shifting back into something more guarded. You should answer that. It's probably your father, or Marcus, or someone else whose world you're currently disrupting. Let them wait. Clara, I mean it. Let them wait. Let them wonder where I am and what I'm doing and whether I'm finally done playing by their rules. Clara stood, began pacing the small living room. I have some leverage, you know. I'm the heir apparent to Vaughn Industries. I've spent 10 years proving I'm indispensable to the company's operations. The board trusts me, the investors respect me, and I know where every financial body is buried. My father can't fire me without destabilizing everything he's built. So you're going to blackmail him into letting you reform the company? I'm going to negotiate from a position of strength. There's a difference. Clara turned to face him. But I need your help. I need you to document everything about the Paramount accident. Not for legal action, not yet, but for my understanding. I need to know exactly what happened, who knew what when, and how the cover-up was managed. If I'm going to fight this fight, I need to understand every angle. Evan stood slowly, his expression unreadable. You're asking me to relive the worst period of my life, to write down every detail of how I lost everything. Why would I do that? Because you deserve to have your story told. Because the other workers who were hurt deserve justice too. Because Sophie deserves to grow up knowing her father didn't just survive, he fought back. Clara moved closer. And because I'm asking you to trust me, even though you have every reason not to. Trust doesn't come easy when it's been broken as many times as mine has. I know, but I'm not asking for blind faith. I'm asking for a chance to prove I'm different from the other Vaughns, that I'm capable of choosing what's right over what's profitable. Evan studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face for something, sincerity, maybe, or just the confirmation that she understood what she was asking for. There's a box, he said finally, in my closet. Medical records, legal documents, everything from the accident and the settlement. I kept it all, even though looking at it makes me want to put my fist through a wall. You can have it. You can read it, use it, do whatever you think will help. But Clara, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. If you do this, if you actually use what you learned to go after your family's company, there will be consequences. For me, for you, for everyone involved. And I need you to be absolutely certain you're ready for that before you open that box. I'm certain. Are you? Because 24 hours ago, you were celebrating Christmas Eve at a corporate party, wearing designer clothes and planning your wedding to Marcus Sterling. Now you're sitting on the floor of a maintenance worker's apartment talking about corporate reform and justice. That's a pretty dramatic transformation for one night. Clara felt the weight of his words, the legitimate question beneath them. Was she certain? Could she really walk away from everything she'd built? Was one song, one night of revelation enough to overturn 34 years of conditioning? But then she thought about the look in Evan's eyes when he'd said, I wrote it for someone who didn't know I existed. She thought about the medical reports describing permanent nerve damage. She thought about Sophie innocently declaring that her father needed friends who weren't stuffed rabbits. And she realized that certainty wasn't the point. Courage was. I'm not certain of anything except that I can't go back to pretending I don't know what I know now, Clara said. Maybe that's not enough. Maybe I'll fail. Maybe I'll lose everything trying. But at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have chosen something real over something safe. Evan held her gaze for another moment, then nodded slowly. The box is in my bedroom closet, top shelf, behind the winter coats. Help yourself. He walked to Sophie's room and knocked gently. Hey, Bug. Want to show Ms. Vaughn your princess coloring book? I bet she'd love to see it. Sophie appeared instantly, clutching a coloring book with such enthusiasm that several crayons tumbled to the floor. It has 12 princesses, and they all have different dresses, And I'm making them rainbow because rainbow is better than just one color. While Sophie gave Clara an enthusiastic tour of her artistic interpretations of royal fashion, Evan retreated to his bedroom. Clara could hear him moving around, the sound of closet doors opening, the rustling of boxes being shifted. This one is Princess Aurora, but I made her dress purple instead of pink because pink is boring, Sophie explained with the conviction of someone who'd given the matter serious thought. And this one is Cinderella, but she's wearing pants because dresses are impractical for cleaning and also for adventures. That's very sensible of you, Clara said, genuinely charmed. What about this one? That's Princess Sophie. I invented her. She lives in a castle made of books, and her superpower is that she can talk to rabbits. Mr. Floppington is her royal advisor. Evan returned carrying a banker's box that had seen better days. He set it on the coffee table with the kind of careful reverence usually reserved for something precious or dangerous. Maybe both. 7 years of documentation, he said quietly. Medical records, legal correspondence, witness statements, photographs from the accident scene, everything I could get my hands on before the settlement was finalized. I told myself I was keeping it as insurance, in case Vaughn Industries ever tried to go back on the agreement. But really, I just couldn't let it go. Couldn't let myself forget what they took from me. Clara looked at the box, at the evidence of institutional cruelty packed away in cardboard in denial. This was it, the point of no return. Once she opened that box, once she saw the full scope of what her family's company had done, she wouldn't be able to unknow it, wouldn't be able to rationalize it away or convince herself it was just business. She lifted the lid. The first thing she saw was a photograph. The Paramount Theater's backstage area, taken immediately after the platform collapse. The image was devastating in its clarity. Twisted metal, splintered wood, and in the center of the destruction, a dark stain that Clara realized with horror was blood. Someone had marked the photo with yellow tape, highlighting the failed support structures, the missing safety equipment, the evidence of negligence so obvious that even a layperson could see it. Beneath the photo were medical records, page after page describing Evan's injuries in clinical detail. Crushed metacarpals in the left hand, severed flexor tendons, median nerve damage, 3 surgeries to reconstruct what could be salvaged. Physical therapy notes documenting slow, painful progress toward limited functionality. And at the bottom of the stack, a doctor's final assessment. Patient will not regain sufficient fine motor control for professional piano performance. Recommend vocational retraining. Clara's hands shook as she read through the documents. This wasn't just corporate negligence. This was the systematic destruction of a human being's livelihood, followed by a calculated effort to bury the evidence. There's more, Evan said, his voice hollow. The witness statements are particularly damning. 3 separate workers reported the faulty equipment to management in the weeks before the accident. All 3 reports were ignored. One worker was actually written up for creating unnecessary concerns when he refused to work under the platform until it was inspected. Clara found the statements, read through them with growing horror. The pattern was clear. Vaughn Industries had known about the safety issues and had chosen to ignore them because addressing them would have cost money and time. The renovation project was already over budget and behind schedule. Fixing the platform properly would have delayed opening night, would have impacted revenue projections, would have made someone's quarterly numbers look bad. So they'd gambled with people's lives instead, and lost. Why didn't this go to trial? Clara asked, though she already knew the answer. Because your lawyers made it clear that if we pushed for litigation, they'd drag it out for years. They'd bury us in legal fees and procedural delays until we all ran out of money and energy. The settlements were offered as a gesture of goodwill. Take the money now, sign the NDA, or face years of expensive uncertainty with no guarantee of a better outcome. Evan's laugh was bitter. They made it sound like they were doing us a favor. And maybe they were in their own twisted way, because we all needed money immediately, and they knew it. Clara's phone buzzed again, this time continuously. She pulled it out to find 12 missed calls from her father, 8 from Marcus, and a text from her assistant that simply read, "Emergency board meeting called for 2 p.m. Your presence required." "They've noticed my absence," Clara said, showing Evan the screen. "Are you surprised? You've probably never missed a family obligation in your life, let alone a major business meeting." "I've missed plenty. I just always had acceptable excuses. Clara stood, the box of evidence still open on the coffee table. But this time, I don't think I'm going to offer one. This time, I'm going to let them wonder. Let them worry. Let them realize that their perfectly controlled heir apparent might not be quite as predictable as they thought. That's a dangerous game. Good thing I learned from the best then. Clara began gathering the documents back into the box. Can I take this? I want to review everything properly, build a complete picture of what happened. On one condition. Evan's voice stopped her. Before you do anything with that information, before you confront your father or the board or anyone, you tell me first. We decide together how to move forward. Because if this blows up in our faces, I need to be prepared to protect Sophie. Deal. Clara extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Evan took it. His grip was strong despite the scars, his palm warm against hers. You know this is insane, right? He said. Everything about this, you coming here, me trusting you, us plotting against one of the most powerful corporations in the city. We're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Clara squeezed his hand once before releasing it. But I'd rather be stupidly brave than wisely complicit. Sophie appeared in the doorway. Mr. Floppington clutched to her chest. Are you leaving? Because we were going to go to the park and you could come if you want. Daddy pushes really good on the swings. Clara felt something warm unfold in her chest at the casual invitation, the assumption that she might want to be part of their small world. I'd love to, but I have to go deal with some very boring adult problems. Rain check? What's a rain check? It means I promise to come back another time and we'll do something fun together. Sophie considered this with the seriousness only children can muster. Okay, but you have to actually come back. Promises are important. Daddy says so. Your daddy's right, and I promise. Clara looked at Evan over his daughter's head. I'll call you after the board meeting. Let you know how bad the damage is. Clara. Evan's voice stopped her at the door. Thank you for seeing me, for caring enough to try. Whatever happens next, that matters. Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and left before the emotion threatening to overwhelm her could manifest as tears. She carried the box down 3 flights of stairs out into the December cold and loaded it into her car with the kind of care usually reserved for something infinitely precious. Because it was precious. It was evidence. It was truth. It was ammunition. And Clara Vaughn was about to go to war. The drive back across the city felt different this time. The gleaming towers didn't look quite as impressive. The geometric perfection of her world didn't seem quite as desirable. She passed workers on their way to minimum wage jobs, families bundled against the cold, people living lives that would never touch hers under normal circumstances. But circumstances were no longer normal, and Clara was no longer the person she'd been 48 hours ago. She arrived at Vaughn Industries headquarters with 15 minutes to spare before the emergency board meeting. Her assistant practically materialized the moment Clara stepped off the private elevator. Oh, thank heavens you're here. Your father is... Jessica paused, taking in Clara's appearance. Yesterday's dress, no makeup, hair pulled into a messy knot that would have horrified the woman who'd attended the Christmas gala. Going to have questions. Let him ask them. Clara strode past, the box of evidence tucked under one arm. Clara, wait. Marcus is in your office. He's been there for an hour. And he's not happy. Of course he wasn't. Clara had ignored his calls, skipped their Christmas breakfast, and failed to materialize for damage control. In Marcus's world, that kind of behavior was incomprehensible. She found him standing at her window, his back to the door, his posture radiating controlled fury. When he turned, his expression was carved from ice. Where were you? Does it matter? Yes, it matters. The Chens are insulted. Your father is furious. The board thinks you're having some kind of breakdown. And I'm standing here wondering if the woman I'm supposed to marry has completely lost her mind. Clara set the box on her desk with deliberate care. That woman you're supposed to marry? She doesn't exist, Marcus. She never did. I've been playing a role for so long I forgot it wasn't real, but I'm done pretending now. Marcus moved closer, his eyes narrowing. What's in the box? The truth. About what this company really is, about what it does to people, about the difference between success and morality. Clara, you're not making sense. Aren't I? Or am I making sense for the first time in years and you just don't like what I'm saying? Marcus reached for the box, but Clara intercepted his hand. Don't. This has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me if you're about to sabotage your own company. Clara, I need you to think very carefully about what you're doing. If you walk into that board meeting with whatever crusade you've convinced yourself is necessary, you'll destroy everything. Your reputation, your position, your future. Our future. We don't have a future, Marcus. We have an arrangement. A merger of assets disguised as a romance, and I'm not interested in it anymore. His grip tightened on her wrist. You're throwing away everything we've built over what? Some maintenance worker who played a piano? Some misplaced sense of guilt about corporate practices you had nothing to do with? I'm throwing away nothing I ever actually wanted. And yes, it started with a song and a maintenance worker, but it's become about so much more than that. It's become about whether I'm brave enough to be the person I should have been all along. Marcus released her wrist, his expression shifting from anger to something colder. Your father warned me this might happen. He said you had a tendency towards sentimentality, that you occasionally let emotion cloud your judgment. I assured him I could manage it, could keep you focused on what matters. Clearly, I was wrong. You were never meant to manage me, Marcus. And if my father thinks I need managing, he's about to learn otherwise. This will end badly, Clara. For you, for whoever's convinced you to turn against your own interests, for everyone involved. And when it does, when you realize you've made a terrible mistake, don't expect me to be waiting. I won't. Clara turned away from him toward the window and the city beyond. Because by then, I'll be someone you don't recognize. Someone who actually deserves the power she wields. Someone who uses it for more than just accumulating more power. Marcus left without another word, the door closing behind him with controlled precision. And Clara stood alone in her office, surrounded by the evidence of her success, holding a box full of someone else's suffering, and felt more free than she'd felt in her entire life. The board meeting was scheduled to begin in 5 minutes. Clara straightened her dress, wiped the smudged makeup from beneath her eyes, and picked up the box. It was time to choose courage over certainty. It was time to let the song she'd been ignoring for 16 years finally be heard. The boardroom was already full when Clara arrived. 12 faces turned toward her. Her father at the head of the table, Marcus at his right hand, the rest of the board arranged in their usual hierarchy of power and influence. The Chen family occupied the far end, Mr. Chen's expression carefully neutral, while his wife's eyes held barely concealed hostility. Clara set the box on the table in front of her usual seat and remained standing. Clara. Her father's voice carried the particular edge he used when disappointed. How gracious of you to join us. Perhaps you'd like to explain your absence from this morning's breakfast, or the 17 unreturned phone calls, or why you look like you slept in your clothes. I didn't sleep at all, actually. I've been doing research. Research. Richard Vaughn's fingers drummed once against the polished mahogany. On Christmas morning. How dedicated. Though I notice you chose research over honoring a commitment to our business partners and your family. Clara met her father's eyes without flinching. I discovered something last night that required immediate attention, something that couldn't wait for social niceties or business obligations. And what, pray tell, was so urgent that it justified insulting the Chen family? Mrs. Chen's voice was sharp, her accent making the words cut deeper. We came here in good faith, ready to finalize a partnership worth hundreds of millions. Instead, we were treated to empty seats and excuses. I apologize for any disrespect, Mrs. Chen. That wasn't my intention. Clara pulled the first document from the box, the photograph of the Paramount Theater accident. But I discovered something about your son Daniel that I thought you should know, something that's been hidden for 16 years. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mr. Chen leaned forward, his expression shifting from annoyance to something sharper. What are you talking about? The song Daniel wrote for me. The composition that became the cornerstone of his musical legacy. The piece your foundation has built scholarships around. He didn't write it. The silence that followed was absolute. Clara could see her father's hands tighten on the table, could feel Marcus's glare burning into the side of her face, but she kept her eyes on the Chens, watching understanding dawn slowly across their features. That's impossible, Mr. Chen said finally. Daniel's work was authenticated by Juilliard's composition faculty. We have the original manuscript in his handwriting. You have a manuscript he copied from someone else's work, someone he convinced to let him take credit because that person believed he had no other choice. Clara pulled out the next document, one of Evan's original composition notebooks. Its pages yellowed with age, but the musical notation still clear. The actual composer was a piano student named Evan Brooks. He wrote the melody, developed it, finished it. Daniel took it and claimed it as his own. "This is absurd," Mrs. Chen stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You dare to defame our son's memory with lies from some nobody trying to steal credit? Our Daniel was brilliant. He was talented. He would never—" "He did." Claire's voice was gentle but unyielding. "I know this is painful. I know you've built Daniel's legacy on the belief that he was everything you thought he was. But the truth is that he was human and flawed, and he made a choice that hurt someone who couldn't fight back. And I can't continue to honor that choice by staying silent." Richard Vaughn rose slowly, his face carefully controlled but his eyes blazing. "Clara, you will stop talking. Now. This is neither the time nor the place for whatever personal crisis you're experiencing. No, Father, this is exactly the time and exactly the place. Because the Chens deserve to know the truth about their son, and this board deserves to know what kind of company they've been complicit in building." She pulled out the Paramount Theater accident photo, set it on the table where everyone could see it. The image was devastating, the destruction, the blood, the visible evidence of catastrophic failure. 7 years ago, a platform collapsed at the Paramount Theater. 4 workers were seriously injured. One of them was Evan Brooks, the same man who wrote Daniel's song. The accident was caused by 17 separate safety violations, all documented by OSHA, all known to building management before the incident occurred. Claire's voice remained steady despite the trembling in her hands. Building management was a Vaughn Industries subsidiary. We knew about the problems. We chose to ignore them because fixing them would have cost money and delayed opening night. And when the platform collapsed and destroyed people's lives, we paid them just enough to ensure their silence and went back to business as usual. That accident was thoroughly investigated, one of the board members cut in. Gerald Morrison, who'd been with the company for 30 years. All appropriate settlements were made. The matter was resolved. The matter was buried. There's a difference. Clara pulled out the medical records, the witness statements, the evidence of institutional neglect. Evan Brooks lost his career because our company prioritized profits over safety. He lost his ability to play piano professionally, lost his livelihood, lost everything he'd worked his entire life to build. And we gave him $60,000 and a legal agreement that prevented him from ever talking about it. "Business decisions sometimes have unfortunate consequences," her father said, his voice cold. "That's the nature of enterprise, Clara. We can't be held responsible for every accident that occurs in properties we own. We can when we knew about the hazards and chose not to address them. We can when we valued our bottom line over human lives. We can when we systematically silenced the victims to protect our reputation." Clara turned to face the full board. How many other Evan Brooks are out there? How many other people has this company hurt and then paid to stay quiet? How many safety violations are we currently aware of and choosing to ignore because addressing them would impact our profit margins? "Enough!" Richard's fist hit the table, the sound like a gunshot in the silent room. "Clara, you are out of line. Whatever information you think you've uncovered, whatever crusade you believe you're on, this is not the forum for it. These accusations are serious, potentially actionable, and completely inappropriate. Then let's make it appropriate. Let's call an independent audit of all our safety practices. Let's review every settlement we've made in the past decade and ensure they were fair and ethical. Let's prove that Vaughn Industries values integrity as much as it values profit." Clara's voice rose, passion breaking through her careful control. "Or we can admit that we've built an empire on the backs of people we've systematically exploited and had the power to silence." Mrs. Chen had remained standing, her face pale. "This man, this Evan Brooks, he claims he wrote our son's composition? He has proof? He has original manuscripts, developmental sketches, multiple drafts showing the evolution of the melody, all dated before Daniel ever performed the work publicly." Clara pulled out the evidence, laid it across the table. He also has testimony from other students at Juilliard who remember him working on the piece. And most damning of all, he can play it. Not just reproduce it, but explain every compositional choice, every harmonic decision, every emotional intention, because it came from him, from his experience, from his heart. Mr. Chen reached for the notebooks with shaking hands. His wife sank slowly back into her chair, her expression shifting from fury to something that looked like grief. If this is true, Mr. Chen said quietly, if our son truly did steal this work, then everything we've built in his name is a lie. Not everything, Clara said gently. The foundation still helps students. The scholarships still change lives. That good work doesn't disappear just because the origin story was false. But moving forward, you have a choice. You can acknowledge the truth, give credit where it's due, and rebuild Daniel's legacy on honesty instead of deception. Or you can continue the lie and live with the knowledge that you're honoring a theft. This is extortion, Marcus said suddenly. You're using emotional manipulation to force the Chens into a position where they have to either accept your narrative or appear to be defending dishonesty. It's calculated, it's cruel, and it's beneath you, Clara. What's beneath me is continuing to profit from other people's suffering while pretending I have clean hands. Clara turned to face him fully. You think this is about manipulation? This is about finally being honest about the cost of the life we lead. Every luxury we enjoy, every success we celebrate is built on compromises we've convinced ourselves were necessary. Well, I'm done compromising. I'm done pretending that success justifies cruelty. Richard stood slowly, his hands flat on the table. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Clara, you will accompany me to my office. Now. The rest of you, please excuse us while I handle this family matter privately. No. The word came out firm, final. Whatever you have to say to me, you can say in front of the board. Because this isn't a family matter, Father. It's a corporate matter. It's about the values this company claims to uphold and the reality of how we actually operate. You don't know what you're doing. You think you're fighting for justice, for truth, for some noble cause. But all you're doing is destroying everything I've spent my life building, everything I've given you. You've given me a cage, Father. A beautiful, expensive cage with a view of the city and the illusion of power. But it's still a cage. And I'm choosing to leave it. The room erupted. Board members talking over each other, Marcus standing to argue, the Chens conferring in rapid Mandarin. But Clara's eyes remained locked on her father, watching something shift in his expression. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something she'd rarely seen before. Fear. If you walk away from this, Richard said quietly, his voice cutting through the chaos, you walk away from everything. Your position, your inheritance, your place in this family. I will not allow you to destroy what I've built because you've developed a conscience. Then I guess I'm walking away. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Clara felt the weight of them, the finality, the absolute commitment to a path she couldn't see the end of. But she also felt something else. Freedom. You can't be serious, Gerald Morrison said. Clara, you're the heir apparent. You've spent 10 years preparing to take over this company. You're throwing that away over a maintenance worker and an accident from 7 years ago? I'm throwing it away because I finally understand that some prices are too high to pay. And the price of running this company the way it's currently run, with profit prioritized over people, with power used to silence victims, with success measured purely in dollars rather than in lives improved, that's a price I'm not willing to pay anymore. Mrs. Chen spoke up suddenly, her voice trembling. This man, Evan Brooks, we would like to meet him, to hear his story ourselves, to understand what our son did. Clara nodded. I can arrange that, but only if Evan agrees. He's under no obligation to perform his trauma for anyone's benefit. We wouldn't ask him to, we just... Mrs. Chen's composure cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. We just need to know the truth, all of it, even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts. Mr. Chen put his arm around his wife, his own eyes bright. The Singapore deal. Can we postpone the signing until we've had time to process this information, to verify these claims, to understand what it means for our family? Of course, Clara said. Take all the time you need. Absolutely not. Richard's voice was ice. The Singapore deal represents 2 years of negotiation and planning. We're not postponing it because Clara has decided to air unsubstantiated accusations about a deceased student in a workplace accident that was settled years ago. The Chens can pursue whatever investigations they feel necessary, but business will continue. Father, they asked for time to consider whether to believe the word of a disgruntled employee over the documented legacy of their son, and I'm telling them that Vaughn Industries stands ready to proceed with our agreement whenever they are prepared to honor their commitments. Richard turned to the Chens with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Though, of course, we understand if recent events have made you question whether a partnership with this company aligns with your values. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Mr. Chen's jaw tightened. We will need a week, perhaps 2, to investigate these claims independently. 2 weeks, then. We'll reconvene after the new year. Richard's attention swung back to Clara. As for you, consider yourself on administrative leave pending a review of your conduct and judgment. Gerald, you'll assume Clara's responsibilities until further notice. You can't suspend me, Father. I'm a full partner, a board member, and you've just demonstrated catastrophically poor judgment by attacking a business partner, making serious allegations without proper investigation, and prioritizing personal crusades over corporate interests. The board has every right to question whether you're fit to continue in your current role. Richard looked around the table. All in favor of placing Clara Vaughn on administrative leave? Hands rose slowly. Marcus first, then Gerald, then the others who'd spent their careers learning to align with power rather than principle. Only 2 board members abstained. Sarah Chen, who ran the company's charitable foundation, and Thomas Wright, the newest member who'd been brought on specifically for his ethics background. Motion carries. Richard's voice was final. Clara, please surrender your building access credentials and company devices. You'll be contacted when the review is complete. Clara pulled her badge from her purse, set it on the table with careful precision. Her company phone followed, then her tablet. Each item felt like shedding armor, piece by piece, until she stood exposed and vulnerable, but somehow lighter. The box comes with me, she said. It's evidence in a potential legal matter, and it doesn't belong to the company. Fine. Take your box and your accusations and your misguided principles. But Clara, Richard's voice stopped her at the door. When you realize you've made a terrible mistake, when you understand that the real world doesn't operate on idealism and sentiment, don't expect to be welcomed back with open arms. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. Clara looked at her father across the length of the boardroom, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in her life. Not the titan of industry, not the brilliant strategist, not the man who'd built an empire from ambition and will. Just a person who'd convinced himself that success justified any cost, who'd sacrificed so much humanity in pursuit of power that he'd forgotten what it felt like to choose compassion over control. I know, she said quietly, but some bridges deserve to burn. She left the boardroom carrying the box, walked past her office without stopping to collect personal items, and rode the elevator down 73 floors in silence. With each floor that passed, Clara felt the weight of her old life falling away. The pressure to perform, to exceed expectations, to be perfect in all the ways that mattered to people who measured worth in quarterly earnings and market share. The lobby of Vaughn Industries was decorated for Christmas with the same expensive restraint that characterized everything the company did. Beautiful and cold, impressive and empty. Clara walked through it for what might be the last time, aware of the stares from employees who'd already heard about the boardroom confrontation, the whispers that would follow her for years in business circles. She'd just committed professional suicide, burned every bridge, destroyed every relationship, sacrificed everything she'd spent a decade building, and she'd never felt more alive. Clara drove straight back to Evan's apartment, the box of evidence still on her passenger seat, her phone already lighting up with messages she had no intention of reading. The city rushed past her windows, familiar and foreign at once, the same street she'd driven her entire life but viewed now through different eyes. She parked in front of the apartment building and sat for a moment, her hands on the steering wheel, the magnitude of what she'd done finally catching up to her. She'd walked away from Vaughn Industries. She'd publicly challenged her father. She'd chosen truth over comfort, principle over profit, and the future that resulted was completely unknown. Terror warred with exhilaration in her chest. Evan answered the door in the middle of helping Sophie with her coat. Clara, I wasn't expecting... What happened? You look like you've been through a war. I have. Can I come in? He pulled the door wider, his eyes searching her face. Sophie looked up from her efforts to zip her jacket and beamed. You came back! See, Daddy, I told you promises are important, and she promised and she came back. So I see, Bug. Evan's hand settled on Clara's shoulder, warm and steady. We were just about to head to the park. Want to join us, or do you need to talk first? Park, Clara said, surprising herself. Let's go to the park. I've spent the entire morning in corporate warfare. I could use some swings and fresh air. The park was small, squeezed between apartment buildings and a corner store, but it was full of life. Children shrieked with joy on the playground equipment, while parents watched from benches, their breath misting in the December air. Someone had strung Christmas lights through the bare trees, and they twinkled in the afternoon light like small promises that beauty could exist anywhere. Sophie made a beeline for the swings, leaving Clara and Evan to follow at a slower pace. So, Evan said quietly, are you going to tell me what happened, or are we pretending everything's fine? I quit, or was suspended, or possibly fired, depending on how the board decides to frame it. Clara watched Sophie climb onto a swing, her small face determined. I confronted my father about the Paramount Theater accident in front of the entire board, and I told the Chen family that their son stole your song. Evan stopped walking. You did what? I showed them the evidence, your notebooks, the medical records, the witness statements, all of it. And then I told them they could either acknowledge the truth or continue living a lie. Clara turned to face him. I probably should have consulted you first. I probably should have built a better strategy, been more careful about timing and presentation. But I was so angry, Evan, so tired of watching everyone protect comfortable lies because the truth was inconvenient. Clara, his voice was hollow. Do you understand what you've done? The Chens are one of the most powerful families in Asia. If they decide to retaliate, if they use their influence to spread the story about Daniel and the song, your reputation will be destroyed. And mine, I'll be painted as some opportunist trying to steal credit from a dead composer. I know it could all blow up in our faces, but I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't sit in that boardroom and watch everyone choose profit over truth one more time. Clara moved closer, her hand finding his. I'm sorry I didn't ask your permission first. Your story is yours to tell or not tell. I shouldn't have made that choice for you. Evan's hand tightened around hers. You really walked away from everything. Your position, your family, your entire life. Why? Because staying would have meant becoming someone I couldn't live with. And because, Clara hesitated, then pushed forward, because you deserve to have someone fight for you. You've spent 16 years being invisible, letting powerful people take credit for your work and blame you for their negligence. Someone needed to stand up and say that wasn't acceptable. And I guess I decided that someone should be me. Even if it costs you everything? Especially then. Otherwise, what's the point of having power if you're too afraid to use it for something that actually matters? Sophie's voice carried across the playground. Daddy, push me high enough to touch the clouds. Evan squeezed Clara's hand once more, then released it to jog over to his daughter. Clara watched him push Sophie on the swing, watched the little girl's delighted laughter as she soared higher, watched the way Evan's entire face transformed when he smiled at his child. This was what she'd chosen. Not revenge, not vindication, not even justice exactly. Just the simple act of refusing to value profit over people, of choosing to see someone who'd been invisible, of deciding that truth mattered more than comfort. Her phone buzzed insistently. Clara pulled it out to find a text from Jennifer, her attorney. What the hell did you do? Your father's lawyers are already calling about potential breach of fiduciary duty. Call me ASAP. Another text followed immediately after, this time from Sarah Chen, the board member who'd abstained from voting for Clara's suspension. That took guts. Probably insane guts, but guts nonetheless. Coffee tomorrow? And then, unexpectedly, a message from an unknown number. Ms. Vaughn, this is Thomas Chen. My parents would like to meet with Evan Brooks at his earliest convenience. No lawyers, no pressure, just conversation. Would you facilitate an introduction? Clara stared at the message, hope and fear warring in her chest. This could go so many ways. The Chens could be planning to discredit Evan, to protect their son's legacy at any cost. Or they could genuinely want the truth, want to understand what had really happened. Everything okay? Evan had returned from pushing Sophie, who'd moved on to the monkey bars with the fearless determination of 5-year-olds everywhere. Clara showed him the message. The Chens want to meet you. What do you think? Evan read it twice, his expression unreadable. I think I'm terrified. I think this could be a trap. I think even if it's genuine, dredging up 16-year-old pain for their benefit seems masochistic at best. So is that a no? It's a, I need to think about it. Maybe talk to a lawyer. Definitely figure out what I'd even say if I agreed. Evan handed back her phone. But Clara, whatever happens with the Chens, you need to protect yourself. Your father is going to come after you hard. He's not going to accept losing control of you or the company without a fight. I know, but I've got Jennifer working on a legal strategy, and I have enough dirt on Vaughn Industries practices to ensure mutually assured destruction if father pushes too hard. Clara managed to smile. It's amazing how much leverage you have when you're willing to lose everything. They stood together in the winter afternoon, watching Sophie play with the unselfconscious joy only children possess, and Clara felt the future spreading out before her, uncertain, terrifying, and somehow full of more possibility than her carefully planned corporate trajectory had ever offered. What will you do? Evan asked quietly. If the board review goes badly, if your father cuts you off completely, do you have a plan? Not really. I have savings, investments that are mine independent of the company. I won't starve. But beyond that, Clara shrugged. I guess I'll figure it out. Maybe I'll go back to school, finish the music degree I started before father pulled me out. Maybe I'll do something completely different. The point is, for the first time in my life, the choice is actually mine. Sophie ran over, her cheeks flushed with cold and exercise. I'm hungry. Can we get hot chocolate? Please, 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 with extra marshmallows? I think that can be arranged. Evan scooped up his daughter with practiced ease. There's a cafe 2 blocks over. They make hot chocolate that's basically melted candy bars. That sounds perfect, Clara said. They walked together through the neighborhood, Clara in her designer dress and ruined heels, Evan in his worn jeans and Sophie's hand-me-down coat, Sophie chattering about everything and nothing while clutching Mr. Floppington. They looked, Clara thought, like the most unlikely trio imaginable, and yet somehow, walking between them, she felt more grounded than she'd felt in years. The cafe was small and warm, full of mismatched furniture and the smell of coffee and cinnamon. They found a table by the window, and Sophie immediately began building an elaborate story about how Mr. Floppington was a secret agent rabbit investigating the suspicious behavior of the pastry case. She has quite the imagination, Clara observed, watching Sophie act out an entire espionage scenario with a stuffed rabbit and a napkin. She gets it from her mother. Well, the creativity, anyway. The rest... Evan's expression darkened briefly. Her mother had a lot of imagination when it came to inventing reasons why she couldn't handle being a parent. Full custody, you said. That must have been difficult. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Well, second best. Sophie's the first. Evan's hand found Clara's across the table. I know today was hard for you. I know what you gave up. And I want you to know that it matters. Not just to me, but to everyone who's ever been in my position. Everyone who's ever been hurt by corporate negligence and then silenced with settlement money. You gave them a voice today, even if they don't know it yet. Clara's throat tightened. I hope it's enough. I hope I didn't just blow up both our lives for nothing. Even if nothing changes, even if the Chens decide to protect Daniel's legacy, even if your father wins and you lose everything, it still mattered that you tried. That's more than most people with your kind of power ever do. Their hot chocolate arrived, piled impossibly high with whipped cream and marshmallows. Sophie's eyes went wide with delight, and she immediately dove in with the kind of enthusiasm that guaranteed at least some of the chocolate would end up on her clothes. Clara's phone buzzed again. This time it was her father. You have until Monday to reconsider your position and apologize to the board. After that, the consequences will be permanent. She showed the message to Evan. 48 hours to choose between truth and comfort. That's generous of him. What are you going to do? Clara looked at Sophie, at the chocolate mustache forming on her upper lip, and the pure joy in her eyes. She looked at Evan, at the scars on his hand and the hope in his face. She looked out the window at the neighborhood full of people living real lives instead of curated ones, and she knew exactly what she was going to do. I'm going to choose the hard thing, Clara said. I'm going to stand by what I said in that boardroom, face whatever consequences come, and figure out who I am when I'm not being Richard Vaughn's daughter. She raised her hot chocolate in a mock toast. To burning bridges and uncertain futures. Evan clinked his cup against hers. To truth and terrible timing. To rabbits who are secret agents, Sophie added, holding up Mr. Floppington. They drank their hot chocolate as the winter sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. And somewhere in the city, in boardrooms and offices and places of power, people were already beginning to choose sides in a battle that would determine more than just Clara's future. But for now, in this small cafe with chocolate and laughter and the beginning of something that might be friendship or might be more, Clara allowed herself to simply be. Not the Vaughn Industries heir, not the Ice Queen CEO, not the perfect corporate princess. Just Clara. Finally, impossibly, just Clara. And the song that had waited 16 years was beginning at last to find its resolution. The 48 hours passed like a held breath. Clara spent them in her penthouse, surrounded by boxes she'd begun packing without really knowing where she'd go, fielding calls from Jennifer about legal strategies, and from Sarah Chen about potential allies on the board. Marcus called once, his message brief and cold. Last chance to salvage this, Clara. Choose wisely. She deleted it without responding. On Sunday evening, Evan called. The Chens want to meet tomorrow, 2 o'clock at their hotel. They've asked that you come too, if you're willing. His voice was tight with nerves. I spoke to a lawyer, not about the NDA, just about what to expect. He said to be honest, don't volunteer information they don't ask for, and remember I'm under no obligation to perform my trauma for their closure. Do you want me there? Clara asked. Yes. No, I don't know. Evan laughed shakily. I keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong, but I also keep thinking about what you said in the cafe, about choosing the hard thing. So yeah, I want you there. If nothing else, so I'm not alone when it all falls apart. It won't fall apart. You don't know that. No, Clara admitted, but I'm choosing to believe it anyway. That's what hope is, right? Choosing to believe in something better even when all the evidence suggests otherwise. The Chen family had taken over an entire floor of the Mandarin Oriental, the kind of understated luxury that spoke of wealth so vast it didn't need to announce itself. Clara and Evan were escorted to a private sitting room where Thomas Chen waited alone, his parents conspicuously absent. Thank you for coming, Thomas said, shaking Evan's hand with careful formality. My parents wanted me to speak with you first, to hear your story without the weight of their grief making it harder for everyone involved. Evan's hand tightened briefly on Clara's before he moved to sit in the chair Thomas indicated. Clara took a seat slightly behind him, close enough to offer support, but far enough to make clear this was Evan's story to tell. I don't know what Clara told you, Evan began, his voice steadier than Clara had expected. But I want to be clear about something from the start. I'm not here to destroy your brother's memory. I'm not looking for money or recognition or revenge. I just want the truth to be known. That's all I've ever wanted. Thomas nodded slowly. My parents have been looking through the evidence Clara provided, the notebooks, the drafts, the timeline, and they've been making calls to people who were at Juilliard during that period. The story you're telling, it's consistent with what others remember. There was talk, apparently, that Daniel had help with his composition work, that he wasn't quite the solitary genius we believed him to be. He was brilliant, Evan said quietly. I want you to know that. Your brother had real talent, real skill. The help he needed wasn't because he lacked ability. It was because he was under enormous pressure to exceed expectations that were already impossibly high. And I think he convinced himself that taking credit for my melody was just leveling the playing field, that he deserved it more than I did because he had the name, the connections, the future that mattered. And you let him. Thomas's voice carried no judgment, just curiosity. Why? Because his father threatened to destroy my career if I made trouble. Because I needed money for my mother's medical care. Because I was 21 years old and terrified and convinced that people like me didn't get to win against people like your family. Evan's hands tightened on his knees. But also because I loved music more than I loved credit. And watching someone perform my work, seeing it touch people even if they didn't know I'd created it, that felt like enough at the time. I didn't realize how much it would cost me. Not just the recognition, but the piece of myself I signed away along with it. The door opened and Mr. and Mrs. Chen entered. Mrs. Chen's eyes were red-rimmed, her composure fragile but intact. Mr. Chen moved with the careful control of someone holding back a storm of emotion. "Mr. Brooks," Mrs. Chen said, her accent thick with tears, "would you play it for us? The song? We would like to hear it the way it was meant to be played, by the person who actually wrote it." Evan's face went pale. "I don't think that's a good idea. I haven't performed in 7 years. My hand doesn't work the way it used to, and I don't want to disappoint you when—" "Please," Mrs. Chen's voice broke on the word. "We have listened to Daniel's recording 1,000 times. We have built our grief around that melody. But now we understand it was never truly his. And we need to hear it from you, to understand what it was supposed to mean, what our son took when he claimed it as his own." Clara watched Evan struggle with the request, saw the fear and longing war across his face. Then he stood slowly and moved to the grand piano that dominated one corner of the room. "It won't be perfect," he warned, flexing his scarred hand. "The damage limits what I can do, but I'll give you what I can." He sat at the piano bench, his posture that of someone approaching something sacred and terrifying. His hands hovered over the keys for a long moment, and Claire could see them trembling. Then he began to play. The opening phrase was hesitant, slightly uneven where his damaged fingers struggled with the transitions. But the melody, the pure, heartbreaking melody that had haunted Clara for 16 years, emerged intact. And as Evan played, as he fell into the music that had once been as natural as breathing, something shifted in his bearing. The fear fell away, replaced by a kind of fierce concentration that transformed his entire presence. This was Evan as he'd been meant to be, not maintenance staff, not invisible, not broken by circumstance and corporate negligence. This was Evan as an artist, as a creator, as someone whose soul spoke through sound in ways words could never capture. The melody built and evolved, moving through the sections Daniel had performed and then continuing into territory Clara had never heard before. The completion Evan had played at the Christmas party, yes, but also further still, new developments that spoke of 16 years of silent composition, of melodies worked out in stolen moments and private grief. Mrs. Chen began to cry, quiet tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. Mr. Chen's hand found hers, and they stood together listening to a song that was both familiar and utterly new. When the final note faded, the silence that followed felt sacred. "That," Mrs. Chen whispered, "is not the song our son played. The notes are the same, but the soul of it, the pain and the beauty and the longing, that is all yours, Mr. Brooks. All yours." Evan's shoulders shook slightly. He kept his face turned toward the piano, his scarred hand resting on the keys. "I wrote it for a girl in a library who looked like she was drowning under the weight of other people's expectations. I didn't know her name, didn't know anything about her except that she was beautiful and sad, and completely alone despite being surrounded by people. And I wanted to give her something that said, 'I see you, your pain matters, you matter.' But I was too afraid to actually talk to her, so I wrote her a song instead." Clara felt her own eyes fill. She'd known the story, had heard Evan tell it before, but hearing him say it here in front of the Chens, while the melody still echoed in the air, it hit differently. It felt like a confession and an absolution all at once. Thomas Chen spoke up quietly. "The foundation, the scholarships we've funded in Daniel's name. What should we do with them?" "Keep them," Evan said immediately, turning to face the family. "Please. They're helping real students, making real differences in real lives. Don't destroy that good work because the origin story was flawed. Just maybe expand the mission. Maybe make it about honoring the truth as well as talent. Maybe use it to help students who don't have connections or family names. who need someone to see them and believe they're worth investing in. Mr. Chen moved to the piano, his hand resting on the polished wood. We have a proposition for you, Mr. Brooks. We would like to commission you to complete and record the song properly. We will credit you as the sole composer, issue a public statement acknowledging the truth about Daniel's role, and use the recording as the cornerstone of a restructured foundation, one that honors authenticity and supports overlooked talent. I can't, Evan said, his voice hollow. I appreciate the gesture, but I'm not a performer anymore. I can barely make it through one performance without my hand cramping. A full recording session would be impossible. Then we'll work around the limitations. Short sessions, multiple takes, whatever you need. We have resources, Mr. Brooks. Let us use them to help you share what you created. Mrs. Chen moved closer, her expression earnest. Our son took something from you, something precious. We cannot give back the 16 years you lost or the career that was stolen, but we can help you reclaim your voice, if you'll let us. Clara watched Evan process the offer, saw hope and fear and disbelief chase across his face. This was what justice looked like. Not perfect, not erasing the harm, but acknowledging it and trying to build something better from the ruins. There's a condition, Clara said, speaking up for the first time. Evan's not the only person Vaughn Industries has harmed. There were 3 other workers injured in the Paramount Theater accident: Tommy, Maria, and Carlos. They all signed settlements that were inadequate and restrictive. If we're talking about making things right, we need to address all of it. Mr. Chen turned to her with sharp attention. You're suggesting we expand our scope beyond just the plagiarism issue. I'm suggesting that if we're going to tear down comfortable lies and rebuild on truth, we might as well be thorough about it. Clara pulled out her phone, brought up the research she'd compiled over the past few days. I've been documenting every settlement Vaughn Industries has made in the past decade that included restrictive NDAs and questionable compensation. There are 37 cases. 37 people who were hurt by corporate negligence and then silenced with just enough money to ensure they couldn't fight back. Clara, Evan said warningly, that's your family's company. If you expose all of that, then maybe it will finally become the company it should have been all along, or maybe it will collapse under the weight of its own corruption. Either way, I'm done protecting it. Clara met Thomas Chen's eyes. Your family has resources and influence that I no longer have. If you're serious about making amends, about using your power for something that actually matters, help me get justice for those 37 people. Help me force Vaughn Industries to actually value human life over profit margins. The room fell silent. Clara could feel Evan's eyes on her, could sense the enormity of what she was proposing. This wasn't just about one song or one accident anymore. This was about systemic change, about challenging the entire structure that allowed companies like Vaughn Industries to operate with impunity. Thomas Chen exchanged a long look with his parents. Then he smiled, sharp and determined. My father didn't build his business empire by being timid, and my mother didn't survive losing her son by being weak. If you're declaring war on corporate negligence, Ms. Vaughn, I think you'll find the Chen family can be valuable allies. This will get ugly, Clara warned. My father won't go down without a fight. He'll use every resource he has, every connection, every bit of leverage. People will get hurt. Reputations will be destroyed. The legal battles could last years. Some fights are worth the cost, Mrs. Chen said quietly. We learned that when we lost Daniel. Grief taught us that money and influence and social standing mean nothing if you've lost your integrity along with them. We don't want to lose anything else to comfortable lies. Over the next 3 hours, they planned. Thomas Chen proved to be a brilliant strategist, his business mind cutting through the chaos to find actionable paths forward. They would start with the Paramount Theater victims, offering to void their NDAs and provide additional compensation in exchange for their willingness to go public. They would hire independent investigators to audit Vaughn Industries' safety practices across all subsidiaries. They would use the Chen family's media connections to ensure the story reached sympathetic journalists who understood the difference between corporate PR and actual accountability. And they would do it all while simultaneously working to record and release Evan's song with full attribution, creating a narrative that connected personal redemption to systemic change. It's ambitious, Thomas said as they finalized the initial strategy. Possibly insane. But if we pull it off, we won't just be correcting one wrong. We'll be setting a precedent for how powerful families can choose accountability over self-protection. Clara's phone had been buzzing throughout the meeting. Her father, Marcus, various board members demanding to know what she was doing, threatening consequences, attempting to regain control of a situation that had already spiraled far beyond their grasp. She'd ignored them all, but now she pulled up her father's latest message. Last chance, Clara. Walk away from whatever crusade you're on, issue a public apology, and I'll allow you to resume your position. Continue down this path, and you're no longer my daughter. She showed the message to Evan. Looks like I've officially burned the bridge. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. You could still salvage your relationship with your family, your position in the company. All of this. The Chens, the investigation, helping the other victims. That can move forward without you taking the fall for it. It could, but then I'd be choosing comfort over courage again. And I'm done with that. Clara composed a response to her father, her fingers steady on the screen. I'm not walking away. And if my integrity costs me your approval, then I never had anything worth keeping to begin with. Goodbye, Father. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The weeks that followed were brutal. Richard Vaughn launched a comprehensive campaign to discredit Clara, painting her as emotionally unstable, manipulated by outside interests, betraying the family that had given her everything. Marcus gave an interview suggesting their engagement had ended because Clara had become obsessed with a conspiracy theory about corporate misconduct. Several board members released statements supporting Richard's leadership and distancing themselves from Clara's baseless accusations. But the Chen family proved to be formidable allies. Thomas's investigators uncovered evidence that Vaughn Industries had systematically underreported safety violations for years, paying small fines to avoid larger investigations. Maria, one of the Paramount Theater victims, agreed to go public with her story, and her testimony about ongoing health complications and inadequate settlement sparked outrage. A business journalist who'd been investigating corporate malfeasance for years picked up the story and began connecting dots that revealed a pattern of negligence across multiple Vaughn Industries subsidiaries. And through it all, Evan worked on completing the recording of his song. The sessions were difficult. His damaged hand limited him to short takes, and the emotional weight of performing something so personal often left him drained for days. But slowly, painstakingly, the song took shape. The Chen family hired the best sound engineers, the most patient producers, people who understood they were capturing something more than just music. They were documenting the reclamation of a stolen voice. Clara attended every session, watching from the booth as Evan coaxed beauty from broken fingers, as he transformed years of silent composition into something tangible and real. Sophie came too sometimes, sitting on Clara's lap and whispering commentary about how her daddy was the best piano player in the whole world. He is, Clara would whisper back, the very best. 3 months after the Christmas party that had started everything, the Chen family held a press conference. They stood together, Thomas, his parents, Evan, Clara, and Maria representing the other Paramount victims, and told the truth, all of it. The plagiarism, the accident, the settlements, the systematic pattern of choosing profit over people that had characterized Vaughn Industries for decades. Mrs. Chen spoke about her son with devastating honesty. Daniel was talented and beloved, but he was not perfect. He made a choice to claim credit for work that wasn't his, and we have spent 16 years honoring a lie. Today, we honor the truth instead. And we commit our foundation's resources to supporting artists and workers who have been overlooked, silenced, or exploited by systems that value power over integrity. Mr. Chen announced a $50 million fund to compensate Vaughn Industries victims and support safety reform across the industry. Money cannot undo harm, he said, but it can be used to build something better, to ensure that what happened to these people doesn't happen to others. Evan spoke last, his voice quiet but steady. For 16 years, I believed I deserved to be invisible, that my voice didn't matter, that my truth wasn't worth fighting for. But Clara Vaughn taught me something important, that choosing silence isn't the same as choosing peace, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply refuse to stay quiet about injustice, even when speaking up costs us everything. The response was overwhelming. Some business leaders condemned the Chens for betraying corporate interests, and Clara for weaponizing family dysfunction. But far more people saw the story for what it was, an example of choosing accountability over self-protection, of using power to elevate voices instead of silencing them. Vaughn Industries' stock price dropped 17% in a week. 3 board members resigned. The SEC announced an investigation into safety practices and settlement procedures. And Richard Vaughn, faced with the possibility of criminal charges, agreed to step down as CEO in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Clara watched her father's empire crumble from the outside, feeling neither triumph nor regret. Just a quiet certainty that this was what happened when structures built on exploitation finally faced the weight of their own corruption. Sarah Chen called 2 days after Richard's resignation. The board wants to offer you the CEO position, clean slate, new leadership, a chance to rebuild the company around actual values instead of just quarterly earnings. What do you say? Clara stood at the window of her new apartment, smaller than her penthouse, in a neighborhood that actually felt lived in rather than curated, and thought about the offer. She could return to Vaughn Industries, could take control of the empire her father had built and transform it into something worth leading, could prove that she was capable of wielding power responsibly. I appreciate the offer, Clara said finally, but no. Vaughn Industries needs leadership that isn't carrying the weight of the family name, someone who can make decisions without constantly fighting against decades of toxic culture. That's not me. That will never be me. So what will you do? Clara looked across the room to where Evan sat helping Sophie with her homework, his scarred hand guiding hers across the page, his voice patient and warm. I'm going to figure out who I am when I'm not defined by my father's expectations, and I'm going to help Evan do the same. The song was released 6 weeks later. The Chen Foundation published it with full documentation of its history. Evan's original notebooks, Daniel's copied manuscript, the story of plagiarism and redemption. Music critics called it haunting, beautiful, a meditation on loneliness and hope that felt both timeless and urgently relevant. But it was the video that accompanied the release that truly captured people's attention. Evan at the piano, his damaged hand visible as he played, Sophie sitting beside him on the bench listening with complete trust, and Clara in the background, watching with an expression that spoke of more than professional interest, more than distant support. The video ended with Evan playing the song's final phrase, the completion he'd written over 16 years of silence, and then turning to smile at Sophie, at Clara, at the life he'd built from the ruins of what he'd lost. That's what hope looks like, one reviewer wrote. Not the absence of pain, but the choice to create beauty despite it, to build something true from something broken, to believe that tomorrow might be better than today, even when all evidence suggests otherwise. A year after the Christmas party, Clara stood in a small community center in the neighborhood where Evan lived. The Chen Foundation had funded its renovation, transforming it into a music education facility for students who couldn't afford traditional lessons. Evan had been hired as the director, not because of his name or connections, but because he understood what it meant to need someone to believe in your potential when no one else did. The center was hosting its first recital, and the room was packed with families who'd never had access to this kind of opportunity before. Children who'd discovered they had musical talent, adults who'd always wanted to learn but never had the chance, people for whom music had been a luxury they couldn't afford. Evan took the stage to introduce the evening, Sophie sitting in the front row with Mr. Floppington on her lap. When I was young, he said to the gathered crowd, I believed that talent was enough, that if you were good enough, worked hard enough, the world would recognize you. But I learned that talent without opportunity is just potential that never gets realized. An opportunity without someone willing to give it to you is just a door that stays locked. He gestured to the students waiting to perform. These kids have talent, but more than that, they have people who believe they're worth investing in, teachers who see them, families who support them, and a community that's decided that access to beauty and art and music shouldn't be reserved for those who can already afford it. That's what this center is about. Not just teaching music, but teaching people that they matter, that their voices deserve to be heard, that being invisible isn't the same as being worthless. The recital was beautiful and imperfect, missed notes and nervous giggles and performances that ranged from technically proficient to endearingly enthusiastic. But the joy in it was undeniable. The pure, uncomplicated happiness of people discovering they could create something beautiful. Afterward, as families mingled and students showed off their new skills, Thomas Chen approached Clara. My parents want to expand the Foundation's work, not just music education, but comprehensive support for workers' rights, corporate accountability, ethical business practices. They're calling it the Daniel Chen Memorial Foundation for Truth and Justice. He smiled wryly. Bit on the nose, but they're committed to making our family name mean something better than it used to. That's ambitious, Clara said. So was taking on your father's empire. And you managed that. Thomas handed her a folder. We'd like to offer you a position, Director of Corporate Accountability. You'd oversee investigations, work with victims of corporate negligence, use everything you learned about how these systems operate to help tear down the ones that need tearing down, and reform the ones that can be saved. Clara opened the folder, scanned the job description and salary. Far less than she'd made at Vaughn Industries, but enough to live comfortably and do work that actually mattered. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need. But Clara, Thomas's expression grew serious. What you did was extraordinary. You gave up everything to stand up for what was right. That kind of courage shouldn't be wasted. We need people like you in positions where they can affect real change. Otherwise, the Richard Vaughns of the world will just keep winning. She found Evan later, after most of the crowd had dispersed. He was sitting at the piano, playing softly, while Sophie dozed against his shoulder, exhausted from the excitement of the evening. That went well, Clara said, settling onto the bench beside them. Better than I'd hoped. Did you see Maria's daughter perform? She's only been studying for 3 months and she's already showing real promise. Evan's voice was warm with pride. This is what it's supposed to feel like, teaching, creating, watching people discover what they're capable of. I'd forgotten. The Chens offered me a job, Corporate Accountability Director. Are you going to take it? I don't know yet. Part of me wants to. Wants to keep fighting, keep tearing down corrupt systems, keep making sure what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, careful not to disturb Sophie. But another part of me is just tired. Tired of fighting, tired of corporate warfare, tired of defining myself by opposition to something rather than support for something. Evan shifted slightly, his arm coming around her shoulders. You don't have to decide tonight. You don't have to decide at all, actually. You could just exist for a while. Figure out what you want instead of what you're against. There's no rule that says you have to save the world just because you're capable of it. What if I want to, though? Not save the world exactly, but make it better. Make sure the next person in my position chooses truth over comfort. Make sure people like you don't have to spend 16 years invisible just because they didn't have the power to fight back. Then take the job. Build something better. Change the world. Evan's hand found hers, his scarred fingers lacing through hers. Just don't forget to live your life while you're doing it. Don't become so focused on fixing everything broken that you forget to enjoy what's beautiful. Sophie stirred, mumbling something about rabbits and pianos before settling back into sleep. Clara looked at her, this fierce, joyful child who'd declared Clara should make her daddy less sad, and then simply assumed it would happen because promises were important, and felt something shift in her chest. I think I want to try, Clara said quietly. Not just the job, not just the corporate accountability work, but this, us, whatever this is or could be. I know it's complicated. I know we come from completely different worlds. I know there are 1,000 reasons why it might not work, but I want to try anyway. Evan was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. Are you sure? Because Clara, you could have anyone. You could rebuild your life however you want. Find someone without all my baggage and damage and complications. Someone who doesn't come with a 5-year-old and medical bills and a history of being crushed by systems you used to be part of. I don't want someone else. I want the man who wrote a song for a lonely girl in a library and never expected anything in return. I want the father who plays piano for his daughter, even though it hurts his hand. I want the person who taught me that choosing truth over comfort isn't stupid or naive. It's brave. Clara's free hand came up to cup his face. I want you, Evan. If you'll have me. He kissed her then, soft and careful and full of promise. Sophie mumbled a sleepy protest at being jostled, and they broke apart laughing. I guess that's a yes, Clara said. That's a yes, to trying, to whatever this becomes, to choosing hope even when it's terrifying. Evan stood carefully, Sophie still cradled against his shoulder. Come on, let's get this one home to bed, and tomorrow we can start figuring out what our future looks like. They walked through the quiet streets together, the city settling into evening around them. Claire had no penthouse to return to anymore, no corporate empire, no carefully curated life of controlled perfection. She had a modest apartment, a job offer that would pay a fraction of what she used to make, and a future that was completely uncertain. But she also had Evan's hand in hers. She had Sophie's sleepy trust that adults would figure things out because that's what adults did. She had the knowledge that she'd chosen truth over comfort and survived the consequences. She had a song that had finally found its way home. And somehow, impossibly, that felt like more than enough. 6 months later, Clara stood backstage at a concert hall. Not the Paramount, never the Paramount, but a smaller venue that specialized in contemporary classical music. Evan was about to perform his song live for the first time since the recording's release. The Chen Foundation had organized the concert as a fundraiser, and every seat was sold out. Sophie sat beside Clara, wearing a dress she'd insisted on choosing herself, which meant it was purple with sparkles and completely impractical. Mr. Floppington occupied the seat beside her, also dressed for the occasion in a tiny bow tie. Is Daddy nervous? Sophie whispered. Probably, but he's brave, remember? He can fight anything. Even dragons? Especially dragons. The lights dimmed, the crowd fell silent, and Evan walked onto the stage, his scarred hand visible to everyone, his posture that of someone who'd stopped hiding and started healing. He sat at the piano without preamble and began to play. The melody that had waited 16 years to be properly heard filled the concert hall. Every note that Clara had first heard at the Christmas party, every phrase that had haunted her through the revelation and the battle and the transformation that followed. But this time, Evan played it without hesitation, without fear, without the weight of invisibility crushing his confidence. This was the song as it was meant to be, not stolen, not silenced, not diminished by comfortable lies. Just true. Painfully, beautifully true. Clara felt tears slide down her cheeks as Evan reached the completion, the section he'd written over 16 years of silence, the musical expression of everything he'd lost and everything he'd somehow managed to keep despite it all. The melody spoke of grief and hope, of being broken and choosing to rebuild, of believing that tomorrow could be better even when today was almost unbearable. When the final note faded, the silence lasted for 3 full heartbeats. Then the applause started, thunderous, overwhelming, the kind of recognition that Evan had deserved 16 years ago and was finally, impossibly receiving now. He stood and bowed, his eyes finding Clara and Sophie in the wings. The smile on his face was radiant, transformative, the expression of someone who'd reclaimed not just his voice, but his entire sense of self-worth. Clara thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, the Ice Queen CEO who'd built her life on control and careful calculation, who'd measured success in quarterly earnings and never questioned the cost of her comfort. That woman was gone, transformed by a single song into someone who understood that true power wasn't about controlling others. It was about choosing to use whatever influence you had to elevate voices instead of silencing them. She'd lost her family, her company, her carefully constructed future. But she'd gained something infinitely more valuable, the ability to look at herself in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. After the concert, they celebrated at a small restaurant near the community center. The Chen family joined them, along with Maria and several other Paramount Theater victims who'd become part of their extended chosen family. Sophie fell asleep at the table again, this time with her head on Clara's lap. Mr. Floppington clutched to her chest. She's decided you're permanent, Evan said softly, watching his daughter sleep. Fair warning. Good, because I've decided the same thing about both of you. Thomas Chen raised his glass. To new beginnings. To choosing truth over comfort. To songs that refuse to be silenced. They all drank to that. to redemption and second chances, to the courage it took to tear down corrupt systems and the patience it took to build better ones, to the understanding that justice wasn't a destination, but a continuous choice to value people over profit, integrity over convenience, truth over comfortable lies. And later, when Clara and Evan walked home through the city streets with Sophie sleeping between them, Clara realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the absence of difficulty or struggle, not the achievement of perfect security or flawless success, just the quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, with exactly the people she was meant to be with, living exactly the kind of life worth living. The song that had waited 16 years had finally found its resolution, not in a single moment of triumph, not in revenge or vindication, but in the slow, patient work of rebuilding what had been broken, in choosing to create beauty despite pain, in believing that tomorrow could be better than today, and then doing the hard work to make that belief reality. And as they climbed the 3 flights of stairs to the apartment that had become home, Clara hummed the melody softly. Evan's melody, finally credited properly, finally heard the way it was meant to be heard. Sophie stirred sleepily. "That's Daddy's song, the one he wrote for you before he knew you." "It is," Clara agreed, unlocking the door and carrying the little girl inside. "It's a good song," Sophie mumbled, already drifting back to sleep. "It sounds like love." Evan met Clara's eyes over his daughter's head, and the smile they shared spoke of everything they'd survived and everything they'd built and everything they still had to look forward to. "Yeah," Evan said softly. "It does. It really does." And in that small apartment filled with secondhand furniture and homemade art and the evidence of lives being lived with intention and joy, the song that had waited 16 years to be properly heard finally, truly came home.